to thank you all for joining us tonight, particularly the audience who has taken the time out of their schedules to come hear this, what I think will be a very eye-opening presentation from Mr. Minicozzi. This is a follow-up to City Council's October 6th and November 3rd work sessions where Council discussed the land use chapter of our comprehensive plan that's currently in draft form, as well as the city's development review process. Planning Board and City Council have spent a great deal of time, as the Mayor mentioned, in work sessions developing the city's draft comprehensive plan. The issue of density has been a core topic in those discussions. We've primarily focused on discussing density in the context of walkability and maximizing use of the city's finite space for development within our corporate jurisdiction. Tonight we'll receive a presentation where we look at the issue of density in the context of land use valuation, property tax revenue, and urban design. Also, we'll hear a presentation on the concept of form-based codes, which is an approach to land use management that Council expressed interest in at its October 6th work session. It is staff's hope that tonight's presentation will reinforce the importance of promoting greater density and land use diversity in the city. Also, staff will present some options for exploring form-based codes at Council's December 15th regular scheduled meeting. So tonight's presentation should help set the stage and prepare Council for that discussion. Joining us tonight is Mr. Jim Minicozzi. Mr. Minicozzi is principal at Urban 3, a firm that specializes in analyzing the relationship between building design and tax production, or tax revenues. Mr. Minicozzi is also formerly a partner of Public Interest Projects, which is a for-profit real estate development company based in Asheville, which focuses on mixed-use urban development. Some examples of successful projects are the Orange Peel, Zombras, Salsas, and the conversion of the Asheville Hotel into a retail and residential mixed-use project. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Minicozzi to tonight's meeting and turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. I want to thank all of the staff. I want to thank Mr. Moore for having an interest in our work. I think this is a conversation we had a couple years ago, as well as Mr. Cobb. And as part of this process, we actually did. We acted as a consultant, but to some extent, we also baked this process with your staff. So I want to single out Aaron Bland as well as JT John Tyler Barnes from our office, where they work together collaboratively. So when we get into the maps and data, I want you to realize that that's a lot of Aaron's handiwork getting into that. But the presentation that we're about to see it's a little bit nerdy, some technical stuff, but I want to put it into a context of how we look at cities. And I'll kind of take a step back and explain to you how I look at cities. And I want to put a couple of my lessons up front. So the first lesson is that cities have a DNA. They have a trajectory of growth, much in the way that I do, right? So this is how I started my life, and when I was 3 months old and had some hair. And this is what I'm going to become, right? So I know I'm going to be Papa whether I like it or not. Or more importantly, I'm going to be this guy, my dad. So we have two genetic issues in my family. I'm genetically Italian, which you can tell from my name. We like to eat a lot. But we also have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So I have to keep that in check. I have to watch what I eat. I have to exercise. I have to lower my stress level. I do that for myself. Also because I know our history, right? You all do this, right? You know where you're growing and where you're going. Well, what's Brevard going to be? What are you going to be when you grow up? Are you looking at Asheville and seeing its path? Are you learning the heart attacks that it had, or other municipalities? So as you go through your comprehensive plan, think about that. What are the issues you're trying to work through, and what's the context that you put them in? But the easiest way to think about it for me is this. Secondly, I'm going to give you a quick little test. I know there's a couple of people from Asheville that may have seen this, so no shouting out the answers. But I'm going to give you about 5 seconds to tell me how many shapes you see in this next image. So just 5 seconds. It's a kid's puzzle. It's real simple. Just tell me how many shapes you see in this next picture. Ready, go. Okay, no one's going to fail. So how many shapes did y'all see?
9.
9?
17.
17? 8? 20? Anybody want to go higher than 20? How many kids were on the school bus? Anyone? Anybody see how many kids were on the school bus? What time was it on the clock? You know, what's interesting about the way that we behave is that is humans, we're kind of wired a certain way to see information. That we can strip out everything in front of us to get to that point that we're looking at. So I wired your process. I asked you a question. You eliminated the 5 kids on the school bus or that it was 10 after 10 on the clock, right? You didn't see that. As you go through these processes of thinking of your future, as you consider an individual development proposal, be aware there's other information that's out there that you need to bring into the context of discussion. You need to bring all of that information forward. And a lot of what we're going to show going into this is information that's been hiding in plain sight. We just haven't asked those questions. So part of what we want to talk about here are what are the questions to ask about development patterns that encourage your community's revenue, your community's growth and wealth, right? So this is about how we look at that. So really quickly, you know, getting to that, the bigger question to ask is what's a city? Here's Asheville. And we all know where it is. This is how Asheville started in the 1800s. This is a shot from Bowcatcher Mountain. Probably when Asheville was about the same size that y'all are, about 6,000 people back then. This is a shot down Main Street. You all have stood here. 30 years after this picture was taken, this is what it became. We like to say the 3 T's made Asheville: trains, tourism, and tuberculosis. That once the trains came there, Asheville started exploding. Presidents came to visit. We had the second streetcar line in the entire country. There's Teddy Roosevelt. We've had Obama there a couple of times. During the 1920s, we were growing at 20% in population every single year through that decade. We were the second largest city in North Carolina. Did y'all realize that? We were bigger than Charlotte. The only city that was bigger than Asheville by the end of the 1920s was Winston-Salem, and that was it. So through that growth, we achieved this is kind of nice, we achieved the highest debt per capita in the entire United States. We were number 1 in debt. And when the Depression hit, and our books were audited, we thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turns out we had $18,000 in the bank. A little clerical error. Our city council was indicted and the mayor committed suicide. That's how we entered the Depression. I don't know if y'all know that history about Asheville. But when you hear about the water wars that are going on today, this is where it all started. It was that infrastructure that we bonded ourselves out for that growth that we were occurring. Thomas Wolfe, famous American author, also native of Asheville, this is what he had to say about his hometown. Asheville has squandered fabulous sums. They've flung away the earnings of a lifetime. They've mortgaged those of a generation to come. They have ruined a city, and in doing so, they've ruined themselves, their children, and their children's children. Not so kind words to say about your hometown. And incidentally, his second book was called You Can't Go Home Again for obvious reasons. But that's kind of paints a picture for what Asheville went through. It took us until 1976 to pay off that debt. This is actually a front page shot of the Asheville Citizen-Times. What's interesting is the kind of the psychic damage that it did to the community, that this was such an achievement to pay off that debt. We were one of the few cities in the entire United States that didn't go through the New Deal program, that specifically chose not to take federal dollars to pay off our own debts. It was incredibly responsible. And even with that, it shows you the psychic damage that we had, that it didn't even make it above the fold in the newspaper. It was this number 3 story after something about abortions and a prison fire. So that'll tell you what happened in Asheville. Because we had that debt, we couldn't do things that other cities could do. So that if you've traveled around, you've seen a lot of cities that had urban renewal. They tore down their downtowns. We were too poor to do that. But when we got out of that debt, we started cooking with gas. We did the Crosstown Expressway, which was the I-240, ripping through between Merriman and downtown. And the coup de grace was blowing up Bowcatcher Mountain into the cut. And on the other side of the cut, the mall happened, and our downtown died. These are histories that some of y'all may remember, and some of y'all may not be aware of. But these are shots of our downtown from not too long ago. These are the late 90s downtown Asheville. This is a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. Look at this wonderful fixer-upper right here. Anybody want to put in some elbow grease? It could all be yours, right? So this is what our downtown was left with. Just boarded up buildings. This is the Grove Arcade, bricked in. And a lot of buildings, upper stories, totally fallow. It's a shot of downtown again. We like to joke that our answer was aluminum. We just kind of covered up and just hoped that it disappeared or something. This is Haywood Street. You know, today we can be out there and see hundreds and thousands of people walking up and down the street. You can shoot a cannon off and not hit a pedestrian in this shot. So like a Greek choir, anytime somebody tried to work on downtown, those children's children would rise up. That'll never work here, don't even try. We've been down that path of a downtown. It's not going to work for us. Do y'all have some of these people in your town? You know, every community that we go to, we see this resistance toward that natural path of growth that every city across the planet has had for 10,000 years. The urban core is part of who you are. So, and I don't know if y'all remember the Strauss-Greenberg plan. This is a plan for a mall in the downtown. This was pretty much the turning point for downtown Asheville. This had to go on to a voter referendum because they were going to take over a street. This is Lexington Avenue right here. So if you've ever been to Bouchon, it would be somewhere in between this parking garage in that building. But basically, the mall would have covered this much territory from, here's Pritchard Park right here, would go down College Street, over to Broadway, here's where Mellow Mushroom is, and would go all the way up to Woodfin, up to Rankin, and back up again. A tremendous amount of our downtown would have been engulfed with this, ripping up every building that was left in that core area. This lost 70 to 30. 70% of our community said this is not the path that we want to go down. That shifted the politics. Mayor Bissett was one of the key individuals in city staff. They hired a city manager in Doug Bean who implemented a downtown revitalization first strategy led by Leslie Anderson as a downtown director. This is in the late 80s this was going on. We had a downtown development office. They started a lot of capital improvement projects to start to kickstart downtown. And again, that wasn't just elected officials. We also had active key people in the community that were involved as well. Business owners, civic leaders, and then volunteers as well. On the private sector side, we had Roger McGuire. Roger had moved to Asheville and was doing a series of things with his own, in essence, as a philanthropist. He would fund urban design panels. There was workshops where they would go into vacant storefronts and dream up ideas for downtown. He funded the art projects. He funded the AB Vision project. He also funded a kids program where individuals would volunteer to take children around to talk about the architecture of the community. He was essentially seeding roots in our community of leadership that we're now realizing the benefit of. There's actually people that talk about and have memories of when they were in grade school, getting led around downtown to see these essentially vacant buildings. But they were talking about the history of architecture in their community. But the key thing that Roger did is he put his own money at risk and made condos downtown. He was the first one to really do a large-scale condominium project in downtown and essentially prove the market. Our firm, Public Interest Projects, came in behind Roger, and there was more than just two developers. There was easily a dozen. Julian essentially inherited money from the Jefferson Pilot Insurance Company and folded it into a for-profit real estate development company. 75% of our money goes into sticks and bricks, so a lot of these buildings that you see here, and we reserve 25% to seed businesses. So we start restaurants, the Orange Peel, salsas, zambras, things like that. The Laughing Seed was one of our key investments. We were doing things before the market was made true. So, and that was all done through Pat Whalen, who's Julian's trustee. We'll get into a little bit of details of what we do, but this is one of our buildings before and after. Pat tells a story of what the bank said of this property when we were doing the revitalization. These were 400 to 600 square foot units. The bank said no one would ever live in a 400 to 600 square foot unit. So just a show of hands, who would live in a 400 to 600 square foot unit? Got 4 people. Let me change the question. Who in this room has lived in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? That was our marketing study right there. We saved us $18,000. We just basically thought of, it's 80,000 people in Asheville. These are 24 units. Surely they're going to get occupied by people that are new to town, recently graduated, recently divorced, whatever, want to downsize. This has been 99% leased up ever since. In the developer world, we call this a home run. In the banking world, we were told this would never work. And again, we just thought about what cities are. So this is the Orange Peel before. It was a Napa Auto Parts store. This is what it became. This market had been tested in our community already with Be Here Now, the nightclub that was in downtown before that, proved that the market would work. This was a no-brainer for us. We like to have those ingredients in the town because we primarily focus on housing, the stuff in the upper stories. This is one of our projects that's the Aloft Hotel. And we're going to be doing housing on the backside on Lexington. And to let you know, we were actually designing a building in the neighboring property, and we were approached by about 4 different hotels. And finally, with the Aloft, we're just like, well, this is an interesting price point. It's a lot lower than what we were typically offered. So we went to the city and worked with them about building a parking garage. One of my friends at the city actually commented. She said, you know, Joe, that's great. It only took 4 years to get the agreement signed. I don't know if y'all know much about time, but in developer world, 4 years is a really long time. And I said to her, I said, Sasha, look, that was before we started the contract, before we started the construction, before we got financing. That was just to get the agreement between us and the city done. 4 years. You know how many kids we can my wife and I could produce in 4 years? 5. We could make 5 people in the time that it took for us to have an agreement with you. Now, why it was important for us to go through that, most developers would walk away. For us, it was important because there's a public facility here. This is a 3-dimensional model that we made of the legal agreement. So here's the city's garage. The city's garage is encapsulated by one of our buildings, and then the blue is the hotel. What you're essentially building is a public facility that has tax base. This was a property that we could have just sold off to the hotel and walked away, but instead we thought that it was better to meet the city's goals of having a larger centralized parking in the area. We were paying $7,000 in property taxes to the city when this used to be that surface parking lot across from Barley's. This property right now, just with the hotel on it, is paying close to $60,000 just to the city. So the city's realized an annual tax base increase of $50,000 a year off one project, and it's not even done. We still have to build the housing in this building on it. So there's some benefit to the city. On top of that, the people that drive into it, when you all drive in there and park, you're actually paying for the cost of that parking deck too. This is how we were treated in the Asheville, the Mountain Express. Incidentally, we funded this newspaper to get it off the ground back in the 90s, and this is how your children sometimes come back to bite you. And they treat us like some sort of fat cat developers, even though we patiently waited 4 years to get this thing off the ground and help our community. So sometimes, you know, you just have to take your lumps in the public. But underlying all of our work is this broader civic consciousness of how we see our community. Julian passed away in 2001, but before he died, he had his own newspaper called City Watch, and this is an article in his newspaper, and I love this quote from Arthur Frommer that he put in this article. Among cities with no particular recreation appeal, those that have preserved their past continue to enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive almost no tourism at all. Tourism simply doesn't go to a city that's lost its soul. You know, he's just trying to get us to have a consciousness of our community. This is what it looked like back at the time he was writing that. 15 years after, and again, this is 1993, 15 years after he published this, Frommer's magazine would list us as the number 5 place in the country to visit. So just by having that broader vision of who we could be, got us to a place where we could actually realize some community wealth. So that's one side of our firm. The other side is thinking about the data. One of the things that we constantly did or do in our community is bring data to our community about our downtown. So not only are we realizing our own what's going on with our developments, we want the community to understand what's going on with downtown. So what we're seeing is, this is downtown, the central business district. The total taxable value in 1991 was $104 million. So as a portfolio of buildings inside Asheville, it's worth $104 million. Our development portfolio is only about $12 million. So that's $104 million. That's impressive. Just by fixing up upper stories, this is what happened by 2008. We didn't realize a new building in downtown until 2008. So just by getting those upper stories active, we were able to quintuple the value of our community. Our tax base on existing buildings, existing infrastructure, was able to grow new wealth in our community, right? So this is how the mayor and that city manager were treated in our community. These are actual campaign ads from the 1990s. We call the moment the Gang of Four. These these 4 folks got swept into office. 15 minutes after being sworn in, they fired the city manager. And it's kind of a moment in Asheville's history and time that we kind of talk about a lot. But this is what they were complaining about. Parking garages, Wall Street, the Wall Street project of about $1.8 million, basically civic capital project investments into the downtown of about $26 million. So let's do the math here. $26 million, oh, by the way, these are all downtown parking fiasco, millions of dollars wasted on empty parking decks or unused parking decks. Have y'all been to Asheville? Do our parking decks look unused? Yeah. You know, they've actually paid off their debt, their bonded debt already. But incidentally, these are people in our community. Now let's do a little math here. So $26 million was invested in this portfolio, and the yield was $400 million. If you invest $26 million and you realize a $400 million return, is that a good ROI? I would say yes. And we still have this conversation in our community. We're still, even though we've got the experience, we have the evidence, we still have this resistance in our community. Like, y'all are actually ahead of us. You have an MSD, we don't. You know, we've got it on paper, we don't have it in cash flow. And it's one of the ongoing battles inside Asheville. So don't think that you're through all of this stuff, and don't think that it's easy in Asheville. If our portfolio is a $12 million portfolio, Asheville is worth $12 billion. As a real estate development project, Asheville is worth $12 billion. That's 4 times Donald Trump's entire portfolio wealth. So are we having that conversation about our cash flow to understand how our revenue is operating inside our portfolio? So that's another way of looking at it, is Asheville is worth more than all of our professional sports teams in our state combined. The Panthers are only worth $1 billion. So how we look at land, how buildings operate, is critically important to your cash flow. Things that you want to do in your community, anything from education to parks, you have to have a cash flow to pay for that. So this is one of our buildings that we rehabbed. We took it on the chin from that Gang of 4 because this was a subsidy at our front door. They didn't like the streetscape project, so we got a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree, and a wider sidewalk. Because it was in front of our door, it's a private subsidy apparently. Even though the whole world can walk on this, let's go ahead and we'll own that. Thank you, City of Asheville, for the $26,000 of investment at our front door. We took this project from $300,000 to an $11 million value. That represents a 3,500% increase in the community's coffers. The taxes paid on that property just grew by 3,500%. Did y'all have a 401k plan or a CD or a bond that grows by 3,500%? You know, we saw this as a community gift. Yeah, we're paying more taxes. We'd gladly pay more taxes if we see more community investment. But our community is realizing 3,500% more revenue to do stuff with, right? That's great. So people say to me, like, well, Joe, that's fine. That's $11 million. We've got this Walmart over here at $20 million, right? So let's go ahead and throw my house into it. Here's our building. Here's the Walmart. Here's my house. This is my wife, Caroline. These are my dogs. My dogs think they're lions. They're a little weird. But Caroline and I live on a 1/10 of an acre. We pay $2,000 in taxes. So if a 1-acre cookie cutter fell from space and hit West Asheville, it hit my neighborhood. 1 acre's 2/10 of an acre, or a 1/10 of an acre divided by 10, so there's 10 houses. So 10 times $2,000 is $20,000 in total taxes per acre, right? Did y'all follow that? Yes? So if that same 1-acre cookie cutter came over to Walmart, now Walmart's paying $221,000 in property taxes, a tremendous sum. But when you break it down on the acres that it's sitting on, it's only $6,500. Now our building, if you had an acre of that, would be producing $634,000. So if you could run a city, what kind of cash flow do you want to have? What kind of revenue yield do you want to see? I was presenting this in Denver, and I wanted to make it easy for people in Colorado, and I said, look, if you had an acre of land to grow something in Colorado, what are you going to grow? Wheat, soybeans, or marijuana? They got it. You know, it's a cash crop. This joke works in Asheville too, by the way. So you're probably thinking there's retail taxes. You know, what about the retail revenue? So let's go ahead and remove Caroline and I because we don't sell anything in our property, and let's run the retail numbers. Now, right away, the first thing that you'll find in North Carolina, it's almost impossible to find the retail tax cash flow out of any community. Our state has made it basically illegal to see the data. We'll get into that in detail later. But going into the numbers of 2008 when I ran these, this is what Walmart reports in their annual report for annual sales. The city gets a portion of that. So 8 cents on a sales tax dollar was the city's sales tax. Back then, we were getting 27% of that 8 cents. Now it's actually even less. We're down to about 9%. But let's go ahead and hold that higher number and be conservative about it. So the city's getting a cash flow of $47,000 in retail taxes and $3,000 in property taxes, or a total tax nut of $51,000 an acre, total taxes out of that Walmart. And this is just the property taxes the city's getting. You add the retail taxes, you're cooking with gas, jobs per acre. I mean, how y'all want to look at it? When you dig into the numbers and do the math, you can find what is producing revenue, wealth, sustainability, everything for your community, and just let them be apples to apples. Y'all get that? Does this make sense? So I'm giving you this as a preamble to why we're doing the data the way that we do. Now, that's just the city side of the ledger. As y'all know, as a city resident, you're also a county taxpayer too. This isn't scary math to get into. We're just doing a really simple 5th grade division to break this down. It's all on the per acre method. So when we get into the county, this is what you see. So this is the average city of Asheville resident and what they pay in Buncombe County taxes, about $1,700 an acre, where the average resident outside the city limits is paying about $1,200. So the city of Asheville is actually a handsome producer of county revenue and county taxes in the process. We like to pick on the Biltmore estate as well in Asheville, so we got a lovely little tax break right there. But putting that aside, let's get into commercial. Here's the Asheville Mall at $8,000 an acre of county taxes. So now you see why an elected official may go toward the commercial side of things, because you're getting a bigger bang for your buck than residential, right? So there's the mall. Well, let's not stop there. Let's go into downtown now. So here's the mall at $8,000 an acre. Here's our building at $250,000 an acre of county taxes. So what we find is what's good for downtown is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county. The county, how often do they make civic investments into the downtown, or pay for a public space or a streetscape or whatever? Right? So these are all conversations to have. So backing into this, is this all too nerdy? Are y'all following this? It's good? Think about what you're doing right now. We're having essentially a meeting of the board of directors, right? Y'all are the board of directors of a large corporation called the Corporation of Brevard, right? It's a $800 million business. That's what you all are operating. We have a CEO, and then we have the board. So you can read Webster's dictionary right on the bottom here. Incorporation is the forming of a new corporation. The corporation may be a business, a nonprofit organization, a government of a new city or town. Every chartered city in the entire United States is a corporation. It's just a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. There's a cash flow that has to operate. So the citizen is a shareholder in 2 corporations. So don't neglect having the conversation with your county commissioners as well. That you're all in it together. And what grows the downtown of Brevard grows the wealth of Brevard, but it also grows the revenue of the county as well. So the city is essentially a finite boundary of land that's just a number of acres. And since the state passed new legislation where we can't annex anything, that's it. What you got is you got. Counties are even more finite. Transylvania County doesn't go over and annex Henderson County, do they? No. It's set. So the land is critically important. So if you use land as the least common denominator, it can help you get things. So that's why we do the per acre analysis. That's all you have to manage. So Asheville is 4 times Donald Trump's portfolio, and he looks at how his money flows, right? So if we're to do the same thing, we did a study down in Sarasota, Florida, where they asked us to do a cash flow analysis of different housing types. If I were a developer building this godforsaken place somewhere in Arizona, when we build this, we keep track of all the soft costs and all the hard costs, all the permitting fees, illegal fees, whatever, and then all the physical stuff of roads, buildings, sewers, whatever. Then I just divide it by the rooftops and sell it, right? That's how I cash flow that. When the city gets this thing plugged on the street, do you all send somebody out there to audit what it's going to cost you per household? No. You just leave it up to the assessor to put a value, they put a tax on that value, and there you go. You hope that your books balance out at the end of the year. But you're not costing this stuff. Now, I can tell you the cups and the orange peel cost 5 cents. Why do I know that? Because we had a conversation about going from 3 cents to 5 cents because we wanted to go from plastic cups to compostable cups. We wanted to make sure that we stayed in business. So we had to run the numbers. So I'm not the first person to get onto this idea of running the numbers on building development. It actually goes back to this guy, President Nixon. In this document, in 1973, the Nixon administration published this document called The Cost of Sprawl. The federal government was trying to give us information about land use patterns and how they affect our local budgets. They were also concerned because of the first gas crisis of the 1970s, if y'all remember that, and the gas lines. So Florida actually did their own local version of that, and they penciled out the public facility cost per dwelling unit from someone in the downtown. This is, I think, somewhere in Orlando. And then as you spread out, Wellington's in Palm Beach County. And it's real simple, folks. If you have a mile of pipe and you put 500 people on a mile of pipe, it's a mile divided by 500. If you put 5,000 people on it, the price per unit goes down. So it's that simple. We took a couple of the unit prices that we were seeing already happening in Sarasota County and ran the numbers on it. So here's some multifamily literally at the edge of the county. This is the county line right here. And then we went into the downtown. We said, this is 357 units here. Let's pluck out 357 units out of the downtown and let's let them sit side by side. So this is the downtown. That's the footprint of land consumed in the downtown. Here's the same footprint in the suburban pattern. So you're using 1/10 the land to service the same number of people. You've consumed through 10 times your real estate portfolio for the same number of people, right? Downtown versus the edge. You get into the cost for the municipality, you're looking at 57% the cost, 5.7 million versus 10 million. So that's the infrastructure cost. We just went in and grabbed the taxes that were paid, compiled them and lumped it, and this is the taxes paid. 870% more money than this. So if this is my mortgage, and that's my annual payment, and this is John Tyler's mortgage and his annual payment, how long will it take the two of us to pay off our mortgages? So it takes me 42 years, it takes him 3. Now, as you all know, when you do your annual budget, you're not geo-positioning your land costs and your infrastructure costs. But if you started doing that, you'd start to see these numbers. You'd start to see that your money's buried into the ground. Now, I'll give you a dirty little secret. That road only lasts 25 years. So right about here, you've got to reach deep back into your pocket and pay for new infrastructure investments. And you still haven't paid off that first mortgage. Y'all get that? When you run out of money, it's not because of today's budget, but yesterday's decision that you're dealing with today's budget. So just be conscious of that. There's a cost to different development patterns. So in real estate development world, when we have cost, income, and time, I can do an ROI, right? What's my cash flow? What's my return on investment? So in return on investment world, the downtown stuff's an 18% ROI, and this stuff's a 2% ROI. Inflation's 4%, so it's not even keeping up with inflation. So not only are you trending downward because you're not keeping up with inflation, you also have future hits that you're not going to pay for either. That's the brass tacks there, right? I was presenting this in Idaho, and a little town it was actually the whole county was 6,000 people, Driggs, Idaho. And one of the guys said to me, he's like, look, we're a bunch of cowboys here. These are way too many charts. You're getting real nerdy on me, man. Just show it to me in year 20. So in year 20, this is what it looks like. The community's made $34 million over their cost. This is paying it off. Now they're in the red, or the black, $34 million. You're still in the red, $5 million in the burbs after 20 years of development. Did y'all get that? So what we're showing you here, these are just the relentless rules of humble arithmetic, to quote Chief Justice Brandeis. The more you do the math on this stuff, the more that you will see how it's actually affecting your community. So we've done this all across the country. In mashing up everybody's revenue model, we see this trend. For every $1 of county taxes, property taxes per acre paid to the county, a city resident's paying about $5 per acre to the county. The Walmart's about $6 per acre for every $1. The mall in the or big box strip center area is somewhere around $9. As soon as you get to a 2-story building, it starts to escalate. And what's crazy is this is a 3-story building and this is a 6-story building. It's not a proportional growth, it's an exponential growth. As you add a story, you're essentially adding a free cash flow straight in the air that's coming into your coffers. That road's already there. You don't have to go build a new road because you're putting stuff side by side. Y'all get that? So the per acre method of getting to this is critically important because it's about your land use efficiency. It's about how you can best utilize your real estate. We do this with cars, right? Could you imagine how silly it would be if we all started talking about our cars, about our miles per tank? We'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. Now, of course, you all know that's kind of a little bit of lunacy for me to say because we all know different cars have different tank sizes. Well, every piece of real estate is different for the most part. So all of those, how do you compare a small footprint against a big footprint? Well, you have to break it down to the acres. So when we say miles per gallon, the numbers change, right? I didn't change the cars, and we should all be driving 1955 BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. I'm being cute with the joke here, but y'all get this. It's just, we already understand how to do this. So the more data and evidence that, this is our really sophisticated napkin sketch too, by the way. The more data and evidence you bring, the better your ability to make decisions. How can your staff bring you information in a way that you can get to the point and see what's going on? So that brings us to the meat of the presentation, which is you all. So on a miles per tank basis, this is, I forgot about this slide. We do this with technology, right? When you take your body in to see information, you have x-rays, you can see hard tissue, you can even see your fillings. You can do an MRI and see soft tissue, same head, different data. Or you can even do 3-dimensional images of your brains. That you all have technology just like this to look at your own community. So this is what we did with Aaron. This is your miles per tank way of looking at your community. You see huge parks, Brevard's kind of in here. This is Toxaway. That's your miles per tank. So you have no value is in gray, low value is in green. As you go up the spectrum chart, up to $7 million of total value, it turns into purple. So this stuff's really expensive in here around the lake. Now, that's not an accurate way of looking at your information, but unfortunately, oftentimes when we see a project, we're thinking of it this way. How much tax base is this going to provide? Well, you're eliminating how much land it's using when you say that. So if you say, instead of total value, we go to value per acre, the map changes. And now we can start to see the heat coming out of Brevard, actually much more so. Now that's one way of looking at it. This is easier to see. So can y'all tell me where downtown Brevard is? Boom, right there. This is Toxaway, and when we saw Toxaway, we're like, well, that's pretty impressive. So you see Toxaway peaking out at about 7 million an acre. This is like a side view of the model, like a mountain range. And then it pops back up again in downtown Brevard at 12 million. So y'all are beating Toxaway on a tax potency basis. But getting into Toxaway for a second, what's really kind of interesting, let's go look at it flat. Here's the lake. So essentially there's a crust of value around the edge of the lake of valuable housing. As soon as you cross the street, it drops off the table. To make the point, let's go to get into the details. So the land value, the value of the dirt under the houses is averaging about $1 million an acre just for the dirt around the edge of Toxaway. When you add the buildings onto it, it pumps up to about $1.5 million an acre. Crossing the street, these are the numbers. It drops down to $100,000 and the total value of $200,000. So it's about 11% the dirt value just by crossing the street, and about 15% the total value crossing the street. Or let's do it another way. This is the value of the first ring around the lake, about 1.5 million an acre, and this is across the street. So that the potency of that lake is very, very clear, but then it dissipates incredibly rapidly. Where you don't see that in the city. You see the downtown is got a high value, but it's also more opportunity for you to grow. So let's get into your community. Is this cool? It's kind of a nerdy way of looking at things, but it's visual cash flow basically. Another way of doing it, rather than 3D, we kind of fool around with. We're kind of map nerds. This is a mapping program called cartogramming. This is a map from 1921. It's a real simple way to communicate information from a value standpoint. So, this is a map of being energy sales in the United States in 1921. And right away you can see that New York's the #1 energy seller because they make it the biggest shape in the object. So rather than going 3D, let's do a two-dimensional distortion of your map and see the potency of Brevard. So we'll go in here and do the cartogram. Here's the way that its actual geography, here's its cartogram. Or to put it side by side, here's the feeling of Brevard inside of all of Travis County, or Transylvania County, sorry. Or looking at just your town or your city and doing the same thing. This is how it feels. So your downtown takes up about that much physical area inside your portfolio, but from an economic standpoint, your downtown today feels like a 1-to-12 ratio. Does that make sense? It's just another way of thinking of yourself. I'm just trying to give you new tools of thinking of your cash flow. So here's just Brevard's 3D model, and again, here's downtown here, and then this is heading north. 29% of your downtown is tax exempt. We see this with a lot of cities. In Asheville, it's 44% exempt, which is a little on the high side. So you guys are actually doing all right. It's just something to be aware of. This is your most fertile soil, and the more land you take off that tax base, the more opportunity you lose in that garden to cultivate wealth. So it's something to be conscious of with civic properties. And I'll have this whole presentation as a PDF for y'all too. You'll have these images. This is your city. Your city, you're about 28% exempt, which again isn't so bad. That's with a college, takes a lot of land off, the schools and things like that, and parks. When you get into the county, you can see the effect of the federal parks. You're about 50-50. The value of Brevard inside the county, your footprint of Transylvania County is about 2%, yet when you pull the county's cash flow that they get from the city, that you all pay in Transylvania County property taxes, y'all are kicking in about 15% of the revenue. So that's like a 1 to 7.5 ratio of value potency on a per square foot basis. Y'all get that? So you're taking up a little bit of area, but you're really punching above your weight on value. So just to get through some land uses, this is how y'all can look at this stuff. This is the Walmart. The Walmart's value is about like $750,000 an acre. When you add in all the stuff around it, including the hotel and all the other strip malls, it pumps up to about let's give it $850,000 an acre. That's the Walmart. When you get out to the Kmart, and I'll leave the Walmart up here, it's a good benchmark for communities. The Kmart is actually less than that. It's at $100,000 less in value. A lot of that's because of what it is, the age and stuff like that. Also the size of the parking lot's immense. College Station, now you're up about let's say 1.4 million an acre, which is about double the Walmart in College Station. As soon as you get into your downtown, now we're up around 4.4 million an acre, or about 4 times College Station just by adding 2 stories. The Mayberry building, 7.8 million an acre. This is kind of surprising. This is the Drew Dean building at $11 million an acre, and this is your big breadwinner, the Platt Architects building at $12 million. Is Mr. Platt in the audience? Y'all need to just give him a big hug. He's really kicking in some revenue on a taxable basis. And again, there's the Walmart in its potency at about $700,000 an acre. So here's the Hollingsworth new additions at about $5 million. Is that your building? Yeah. They should give you a hug too. Now, I went through the newest example last because I want you to be conscious of the lasting, ongoing value in your community. You know, to show you what a nerd I am, I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers, which was an incredibly valuable experience. The president of Walmart's real estate was there, and he was talking about how cheap his buildings are. Incidentally, your Walmart is like within $10,000 an acre of Austin, Texas's Walmart. He essentially goes to the assessors conference and tells them how cheap his buildings are. And so every assessor in the United States is there, and they all take down that number. And what he's doing, which is actually quite brilliant, is he's saying, I want to pay low taxes in all of your communities. This is how cheap my buildings are. And so I strolled up to the microphone and asked him, what's your useful life of one of your buildings? He said 15 years. We can be out of that building in 15 years. In fact, we want to be out of that building in 15 years. This is your community. Do you want a 15-year investment in your community? Because that's what they're giving you. And just be aware of that. I eat potato chips. I eat chicken wings on game day. It's my habit. I eat a lot of pizza too. But I also exercise. So when you have those discretionary calls, just be aware that you've got to balance it out. So when we think of these buildings that your predecessors have left you, incidentally, that's Belk's, right? 1920s, these buildings were built, and they're pulling a value of $7.6 million an acre. This building's almost 100 years old. It's been in your portfolio producing this high revenue yield for close to 100 years. That Kmart's not going to be here 100 years from now. So these are choices. When we talk about subsidy, oftentimes we think of subsidies as we come to a public meeting, I as a developer ask you for a special gift, the community shows up and yells at me, I get my gift and go away, right? That's a subsidy. I get a density bonus or whatever. But just how our cash flow operates inside our taxing system offers subsidies to developers that pick it up as well. Basically, the cheaper the building I make in your community, the lower the taxes I pay. That's how it works. So here's a bar chart showing those buildings. This is your Transylvania County property tax, and this is just the general fund. We extracted out the schools portion, so this is just what your county gets. Right, JT? Yeah. So your county single-family resident pays about $185 to the general fund per acre into the county. The city resident's paying about $670 to Transylvania County per acre. As soon as you get to the Kmart, you're double at about $1,200 to the county. Walmart nudges it up to about $1,500. The Walmart cluster at $1,700. College Station at $2,700. This is the average for your whole entire downtown at about $5,400 an acre in county taxes, just to the general fund in the county. You get into the Red Wolf Gallery at $8,900. The Hollingsworth Building, y'all are paying $10,000 to the general fund per year to the county. 26 East Main, just down the street from you, is about $15,000. Mayberry Building at $15,700. This is the Drew Dean Gallery at about $22,000, and then the Platt Building at $25,000 an acre to the county. Did y'all get this? You're getting quiet. Is this too much, or is it all right? So basically, if you had 1.8 acres of Mr. Platt's building here, 1.8 acres of that building equals the entire 27-acre that on an apples-to-apples basis. You know, if you all could put some effort into making something happen, what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck? 2 acres of development or 28 acres of development? If you had 1.4 acres of this building, it would equal the 17-acre that. Or if you had 0.7 acres of that guy right there, less than an acre of that would equal the entire 6-acre that. Did y'all get that? So lots of times when we do these presentations, we get from a lot of folks that, well, this is what the market wants. Joe, you don't understand. People want to have a lot of space. They want to be spread out. They don't want to have this downtown. This is what people want, right? I want to be 6 foot tall and have a full head of hair. I think y'all should give it to me. Yeah, why not? We should all be happy, right? So we usually see pieces of development patterns where you have a spike like you saw in your model, the spike in the model, and then it dissipates. We did a study of Gwinnett County, Georgia, and for me, Gwinnett County, Georgia is the ghost of Christmas future for a lot of communities. What if you let an entire county develop in a purely suburban manner? So, y'all know where Gwinnett County is? It's kind of outside of Atlanta. When we were doing this is their county, the county seat is Lawrenceville. When we were doing their study, they kept on saying to me, they're like, Joe, you don't understand, we're rural people here in Gwinnett County. We're not those city people. I don't know if you know, Gwinnett County is 800,000 people in the county. I'm like, yeah, that's not rural. But all right. And they're like, no, but we're huge. We're 460 square miles. We're big. So for us, it's data. We're just like, well, let's look at the data and let's run the numbers. So here's Gwinnett County. and the people per square mile, about 1,900 people per square mile, which is less dense than DeKalb at 2,800. But as I was presenting this to the community, I said, look at this, y'all. You're about 200 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. Do y'all know what's in Mecklenburg? Sure. Yeah. I asked them, I said, so you know Charlotte's there, right? And I was fascinated as a planner. I'm just like, how the hell did y'all get denser than Mecklenburg without producing a Charlotte? Your biggest town is Lawrenceville. They're also denser than Nashville. They're denser than Austin, Raleigh, Asheville, and Chapel Hill. Their biggest town is 30,000 people, which is the size of Chapel Hill. That's what rural looks like. This is not rural. You know, I wouldn't even consider Asheville rural. We're a city. So this is their model. This is their tax model. And when we printed it out, we're just like, you know, turn it on its side. I can't see what's going on here. That's it. It's like a big, thick carpet. They've got no spike. It's just this big kind of, they've essentially consumed their entire county with one development pattern, and now they're running out of money. And they don't know how that happened. That's the pattern they developed. This is what we typically see. This is Chapel Hill. Y'all can see where the downtown is. So from a cash flow basis, this is the highest value per acre. So y'all are actually have higher value per acre than all of Gwinnett County, and they're 800,000 people. This is Asheville, the peak of the model of Chapel Hill, and all the way up to the less dense Austin. So just for fun, we stuck the three counties side by side by side. So we've got Davidson County, which is Nashville, Austin, and the most dense, Lawrenceville. When you talk about density, keep it in context of what it is. They've achieved density. They wouldn't see that. But this is their value. This is like their economic heart monitor. So they're pulsing out at 192 million in their downtown. Austin's peaking out at 476, and Lawrenceville or Gwinnett County's flatlining at 8 million an acre. That's their cash flow. This is all they have. So behind all of this, that's in essence the presentation, but I just want to give you a little peek under the hood about how, is your tax assessor in the audience? Good. We're going to have some fun, although this is on tape. There are things that work inside the system, inside their mathematics to get the results that you all have to pay for. They're the ones running around with the cash register thing and the sticker gun inside the grocery store, and they're putting pricing on things, right? It affects the physical environment. This is just to show you some examples from around the world. This is in England. King William III created this thing called the window tax because glass was expensive in the 1700s. The more windows you had, the higher your value because you're apparently wealthy because you could afford more windows. So the more windows you had, the higher your shillings rate in taxes. Over that 100-year period, people started boarding up windows to avoid their taxes. The physical world told you what was going on. They threw out the tax policy. In France, you were taxed below your roof line, right here. And so people started sticking stories up in the roof using the mansard roof style to avoid the taxes. When the tax assessor got out there, they were like, you clearly cannot tax me, this is the roof, right? The physical world will show you these things. This is probably the most obscene example that we've seen. This is in Cheyenne, Wyoming. We went into their data. You've got value for dirt, and you've got value for the improvements on the land, right, your buildings. We just went into the computer and turned off the buildings and just looked at the dirt value per acre, right? At the very lowest level, this should be the basic world of understanding how value's set. And you expect the world to look like this. Everybody in the neighborhood's the same value, right? They're all blue. Well, you start to see some anomalies up in here. Like, how would you like to be this person where everybody across the street is $18,000 an acre, and you're sitting down here in $30,000 an acre world? Well, as I was presenting this to the community, I said, hey, what's going on here where this is this big blue thing at $15,000 an acre, and you just cross the street and the dirt's worth double at $30,000 an acre? The tax assessor was sitting in the front row, and she raises her hand. And she's like, you don't understand. And I said, what don't I understand? She goes, well, the more land you have, the lower the value. That was the look that most of the audience had. The mayor just about spat coffee out his nose. And I said to them, look, hang on a second. I got the biggest site on the street. I've got 3/4 of a mile of infrastructure here, 3/4 of a mile of infrastructure here, another half mile and half mile. I've got 3 miles of your streets. I've got the biggest site, which means that I've got the most commerce. I'm sure your planning director will agree I got the most capacity for stuff there. I'm going to get more of your services, and you're going to give me a discount on the land? I'm going to pay you less taxes on a unit basis for that? And she's like, yeah, that's our standard. And so I asked her, I said, so where did this standard come from? Did Moses deliver it? I mean, this is what I presented at the assessors conference, and they all started laughing. And I said, does any of this make sense? And they're like, no. Their magazine for the assessors, their trade magazine, is called Fair and Equitable. And I asked them, how fair is this, or how equitable is this? And they said it's not. And I asked them, I said, could you change it? And they said, sure, we need to talk to Larry. There's one guy, Larry Clark, who handles this for the entire country. And Larry thinks it's inequitable too. But again, this is inside your system too. As we look at, here's your downtown, you see a couple of anomalies out here or up here. Y'all aren't so bad, but you clearly see here where one side of the street is orange and the other side's like a pale yellow, which is a difference of close to $500,000 an acre of value in the dirt. So just be aware that that's inside the mathematics of what's going on in the community. So these aren't invisible market forces making me do things. There are policies that are baked into your system that you have to contend with. When I say the market is dictating something, these are all policies you control. And realize that some of the policies hurt you. So just be aware of that. So Brevard is $836 million. Y'all are less value than the sports teams. But hey, you're 2 Hornets and a hurricane and a half. You know, so think about the cash flow of that. Your county is $5.5 billion, or about 5.5 Panthers. And you think about Mr. Richardson. You know, he's making decisions about Cam Newton. He knows what Cam Newton's towel bill is, right? We know these things when we run businesses. Or more importantly, they got rid of Steve Smith, an incredibly valuable player. They just got rid of him because he was too old or something. That was a very unpopular decision, but they had to make a decision for the longer haul, right? We're aware of this in other business ventures. So this is just all part of your conversation as you think about growing into the future and your long-term effect. And realize you need to bring the numbers to the table to manage these things. So I'm going to go ahead and close here. And I don't know if I want to take a break or run through some models, or I think we've hit the 45 minutes of the first presentation. Keep going. Is this all good? Are you all digging it? So the first question is, now what do you do with this? Once you understand this, how do you think about development projects in the future? So we did the study of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Here's their downtown at nice hot red or hot purple, is around averaging about 2.5 million an acre in here and greater. You see all the non-taxable. This is Blue Cross Blue Shield. This is the college campus. This is a large factory and public housing. But they had some problems going on across the street, across the river. So just taking the core of their downtown, this is their mall, and then all of the power center around it, about 163 acres. Excuse me, their downtown part's about 153 acres. This is $700 million of value. All of this is only $100 million of value. So from a potency standpoint, this is about 5.6 million an acre, and this is 670,000. What was going on in their downtown was pretty crazy. This is at the intersection of Main and Main, right in the middle of downtown Chattanooga. And I brought these up because I thought this was kind of weird. And I said, why would y'all do this? Applebee's, Buffalo Wild Wings, and a Chili's right in the middle of the downtown. And this man raises his hand and kind of yelled at me. It was kind of fun. He's like, "You're an elitist." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, I like Applebee's. And I was like, "Sir, look, I honestly don't care about the businesses. I think that's cool. I eat at Applebee's too. But what's crazy is you go 2 blocks away. I mean, the Applebee's is doing all right at close to 3 million an acre. The mall's only pulling 670. So that's not bad. But you go 2 blocks away and you've got townhouses that are 10 years old that are pulling $11 million an acre. I was like, y'all would have been better off financially just having townhouses here. Or better yet, why don't you put the townhouses on top of those buildings? But don't lose this opportunity of harvesting wealth right at the epicenter of your town. So they said, well, we've got this site across the street, across the river. where this guy wants to do this Publix grocery store, is a developer from Atlanta. They've got the first Green Life grocery store in Chattanooga, so we have a grocery store comp. We also have mixed-use buildings that they've already built in townhouses. So we have the ingredients of that urbanism that we talk about, right, all around the neighborhood. Here's what the developer's proposing. I know how to do retail boxes. This is what I'm going to do as a retail box. There it is, surface parking lot. Now they have these urban design standards to do higher value, higher density buildings and stuff like that. So essentially the discussion is, what's the cost to the community if we just forego our standards? What do we lose in the conversation if we go down to this? So we had comps. We had 2 Publix grocery stores that we could go in and do an assessed per square foot value. We have comps of office above retail, residential above retail in the North Shore neighborhood. Here's the Green Life grocery store. It's called a deep throat model. You have a big box with a liner building in front of it, and you go through a hallway to get into the box, basically. But this is Green Life, and this is the other, looking at it from the other side. Publix has done some crazy things. Here's a Publix grocery store with parking on the roof, and it looks like a UFO hit it, but this is actually a ramp, to a conveyor belt system to get you onto the parking. So that's a high-density Publix. Here's a small footprint urban Publix, surface parking lot, grocery store. This is the back of the building right here, designed in a pedestrian way. So here's the site, 34 foot of grade change, here to here. We just did this really crude, that we use a free software called SketchUp, and I'm sure Aaron can throw these up. These are just little boxes. We drop it into a topo so that everybody could see these housing units will now face onto the surface. They'll be looking at a tarmac of a roof up here, and this is your quarter-mile long future graffiti wall here. Well, what we're running the taxes, and we'll come back to that in a second. Now, if you just do some urban design 101 and just stick some townhouses on one side, hold some couple corners, keep a surface parking lot, just blend it, bring another developer to the table, and do a cooperative development, this is what you get. So at least the houses are facing houses. And if you do better site design, do what the local guy did and bring the grocery store up against the street, do a half deep throat, and then keep the center as parking and then just ring the site, this is what you get. Go crazy and do Miami Beach and drive up on the roof and just densify the heck out of the site, that's what you get. Back it down to West Palm Beach, small footprint, big sea of parking in the center, and then ring the site, that's what you get. And then let's say you've infuriated the developer goes back to Atlanta and walks, and you just get what's already happening in the neighborhood. Townhouses, mixed-use buildings, right? So let's run through the cash flow. This is the taxes currently paid annually in the site, $13,000 in total taxes. If you do the Publix, it bumps up to $45,000. A huge jolt into the coffers of about, was that threefold, right? Did y'all see that? That's the presentation I would make to you as the developer. I'm going to increase your taxes threefold. All right, well, what's your opportunity cost? What does it cost you to make this decision? Well, the first opportunity you lose is this one. So this is just with townhouses. That's $154,000 a year, which is a heck of a bigger bump from that. You do better site design. That's just by mixing the ingredients differently. Go crazy, do Miami Beach, back it down to West Palm Beach, and then this is your no-build scenario, where you just get what's already happening in the neighborhood. Now, what's not fair about this is your annual decision. When these things happen, you're stuck with it for 20 years. You know, when I was presenting when I was at the assessors conference, and I asked the Walmart guy, he's like, 15 years. We're in our building for 15 years, and we walk after that. So if we just roll it up to 20 years and do a net present value of this decision, you're taking a $900,000 opportunity over 20 years of community revenue gain. You're foregoing all these other ones. So y'all could actually make a choice and say, well, we want this one here. Let's just go ahead and we'll donate $1 million into the project or TIF it in or whatever to grow that revenue. If you just drop this by $1 million, you're still over that by fourfold. Did y'all get that? So we just kind of monkeyed around with doing a back of the envelope on this site. So we're kind of, where are we? We're down here, right? One more down, we're down here. Oh yeah, right here. And then we took this site kind of just behind the county building here, which is this site here. And we said, let's just go ahead and do a scenario where we just drop in a bunch of fast food joints. Let's just drop in a bunch of single-use bar buildings like this. This is the urgent care. Incidentally, why is this called Creekside? Is there a creek there? Is there? Okay. I was like, where's it? Did they plow it over or something? And then we went ahead and threw a bunch of, I think, 3 Hollingsworth buildings in there. So here's your existing cash flow on an annual basis of total city and county property tax production. If you do the plaza style, the urgent care, this is what you get. Fast food joints, it was kind of interesting that you kind of nosed over the plaza style, then a mixed use building is killing it. Now again, that's just the annualized revenue. When you look at the 20-year net present value, you're over 1.5 million of total revenue, and you're still somewhere around $500,000 for those. So that was just a quick back of the envelope. Now that you have the comps and you know how to do this stuff, these are things that Aaron can do for you. So retail taxes, just because I have this done, in 2009, it was the last year that we could capture retail tax revenue production. The state eliminated that data point in 2009. I have yet to find a reason why they did that. But basically, here's the revenue production for Buncombe County. This is Asheville's retail tax productivity. We push out about $120 million of retail taxes to the state. That's what we give up to the state. And then this is, green is Black Mountain, yellow is Woodfin, Weaverville, Biltmore Forest, and purple Montreat, and then this is the rest of the county in light blue. The state takes a big chunk off the top and sends it back to the county, and then the county redistributes, right? So y'all get a check from the county when the cash flow comes back. So you see the big chunk that comes off the top at the state. That gets redistributed around the state. It pays for state business and infrastructure and whatnot. This is what comes back to the county. This is what comes back to Montreat, Biltmore Forest, Weaverville, Woodfin, and Black Mountain, and then this is what Asheville gets. So Asheville produces $120 million of retail taxes. We get back about $14 million. From our perspective, we're just like, screw it. It's a heck of a loss. You know, the county, on the other hand, creates $27 million and gets $47 million back. So in essence, urban production of retail taxes is a gift to the county. Y'all look like this. This is Brevard's retail tax creation from that same year. Y'all produced about 7.5 million. You got back about $1 million. The whole rest of Transylvania County produced about 3.3 million and got back 7.2. So again, there's two financial models that the counties get to use. Both of them are slanted toward the rural environment. So just be aware of that when you chase the retail tax dollars, you're really missing the opportunity in your property taxes. Because those buildings, when you do like the large retail boxes, tend to be cheaper and throwaway, so you don't make it back this way. So I just wanted you to have that. Because we have the benefit of doing this stuff all around the country, we were in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is a town of 10,000 people in the way western part of the state. And their financial officer, their CFO for the town, gave me this map. Her name was Roxanne, and I called her up and I was like, Roxanne, this is amazing. I need to marry you. You're awesome. You have this incredible data. This is their downtown. What she did is she bubbled off all of these different areas. Here's where the Walmart is, and she ran the retail taxes produced annually out of each of these bubbles. So not only could we see what's going on inside the town, we could see what's going on inside districts inside the town. And I called her up and told her, I said, Roxanne, this is illegal in the state of North Carolina. And she laughed, and she's like, how do y'all make decisions if you don't have data? I said, welcome to North Carolina. But this is a good data point. And one of the things that was kind of interesting, again, asking the right question, she was immediately poo-pooing the downtown because she's like, look, it only makes 1.1 million, it's 100 acres, and we've got this Walmart down here at 40 acres producing 1.7. I said, well, really, that's not really fair because your downtown is only 40% retail producing. So in this city or town of 10,000 people, Once you remove the city buildings, the county buildings, the churches, the offices that are at the ground floor that aren't producing retail taxes, once you get down to the nut that's actually selling things per square foot, 40% of 100 acres is 40 acres, right? So their little downtown is producing the same 1.1 million, just a hair under what the Walmart's producing, a 100% retail environment. They'd never thought, this Walmart, incidentally, is the first Walmart on the way to Aspen. So they feed off of the way that Toxaway comes into your community, they have Aspen coming into them. And they thought it was a real winner. But this gave them a better look at the data. So did y'all get this? So just be aware that these tools are out there. Just really quickly through zoning, y'all are going to be talking about form-based codes. Quick history on zoning. A lot of it was just obsessed with this kind of stuff. The zoning was birthed predominantly in the early 19th century because of these factories that were coming into towns. You'd get these polluting, hostile environments for neighborhoods. And they tried to come up with a legal structure to really separate that. The key ordinance from a planning perspective or work that happened is 1926, the United States Supreme Court essentially legitimized zoning with Euclid versus the village of Euclid making a zoning code against Ambler Realty sued. So essentially a real estate developer sued the town saying, your rules are too onerous, we're taking you to court, you can't do this, we have property rights. And the Supreme Court upheld the town's right to make their own rules. So when we say Euclidean zoning, this is where it comes from. This is a kid's book from 1937 on city planning called The ABCs of City Planning. And the mayor of, it was actually mayor of New York, produced this because New York was at the forefront of zoning adoption. They wanted to communicate to their citizens the potency of it. And I love this. This is letter Z. Z is for zoning that marks off the land so that home schools and factories are properly planned. So they're trying to teach children why you have to have land use and zoning effects, right? So it's kind of gotten out of control. There's a way that planners typically look at zoning, and that tends to get more obsessed with uses because those are the things that tend to be more of the problems. Form-based codes is just a reaction to that came out of the 80s with architects messing around with zoning codes, basically. But when you get into form-based code, it's really got a history that goes back to the 17th century, where we're making use have a relationship to the street, right? That's all form-based code. That's one of the primary drivers, is where do you place your building and how does it react with the street? Thomas Jefferson even got so far, if you thought that your design standards are onerous, look what Thomas Jefferson is doing in 1797 for Washington. He's not only prescribing walls that they be of brick or stone, but he's setting a height limit too. You have to make your building 30 feet. So he was looking at a way to develop density inside of Washington. But form-based codes mostly come from Seaside, is where the start of it was. This is the zoning code for Seaside. They basically wanted to make a 36 by 48 inch one piece of paper that has everything about where do you place your building, where does your porch go, and your different types of buildings inside the code. So conventional coding or Euclidean zoning tends to deal more with use and less with form and some land management, where form-based code flips it all on its head. They generally don't care as much about the use of the property, except in extreme conditions of you don't want to have high manufacturing next to a residential neighborhood, and on retail streets they tend to stick to you need to have retail uses at the ground floor so that you have that pedestrian traffic. You don't want to have a law office on Main Street, basically, because it's not a high turnover activity. So these are all tools that you have in your tool chest. And I would just think of form-based code as just a different way of doing the zoning aspects, just that small part. And it would fold into and complement your comprehensive plan, your ordinances, and everything. But also be aware, I love this quote from Andrea Stuani, that these things, items inside your current UDO tend to be things that are built up over time that can be scrubbed, that you may have picked up stuff from past uses or past communities that's kind of irrelevant. But you also may have stuff, I like this quote from Robert Frost, you don't take down a fence until you know why it was put up. that there might be a good reason for something inside your zoning code. So don't just wholesale, just throw everything out and just go 100% form-based, but think of a way to kind of evolve it. In Asheville, our UDO, these are, I mean, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. This is our UDO. I don't know. You should come and look at this one. Our sign regulations are 19 pages. 19 pages just for signs. That should tell you something when it's almost as much as your land uses page. So we tend to get a little bit overly obsessed with signage in Asheville. Density, we've actually experimented with some form-based codes, and one of the things to be aware of with density, this right here, these 2 houses per pickup truck, this is Washington, D.C. That's about 60 units an acre. This is Asheville on Charlotte Street area. This is 43 units an acre. You know, so when you say the term units per acre, but then I show this picture, you would never, if I had said 43 units an acre, or if y'all want to guess what this is 44 units an acre. You know, you just wouldn't use those numbers together where most folks would be all right with that building. So form-based code tends to put the building first, and what happens inside the building is secondary. This is at Chestnut Street in Merriman. This is 45 units an acre. This is on Chestnut Street at 54 units an acre for this old hotel that's now apartments, and this is 55 units an acre. Smaller building than this one, but 1 more unit per acre in density. So what you'll find in form-based codes, it tends to turn down the volume on that conversation. And oftentimes there's no even reference to density at all or FAR. It's just, this is how tall your building is, here's where it needs to be placed. This is Boston, 75 units an acre. And again, this is Boston at 96 units an acre. So again, it's put the form of the environment first, its relationship to the street, and then worry about the details of it. So the other thing that you'll hear is the word transect. And Dwani Plater-Zarberg's pretty good at coming up with ways to describe these things. But they have this, here's the core of the town, and as you go out, there's different bands of the community. So you have rural, you have suburban, you have higher density urban than you have downtown. So you have these different, this is in plan of that same perspective. Downtown, first ring neighborhood, second ring neighborhood, third ring in urban. So you have different sets of rules for those different layers. And that comes from nature, you know, that the natural transect, that there's things that you will find in a hardwood hammock that you won't find in an estuary. You know, there's different species, basically. So think of it that way. A regulating plan is important. This is Sarasota's. This is the epicenter of Sarasota, so this is a retail street. So you code the map to respond to those different layers. As you spread out, it changes differently. And just because we're short for time, Asheville just adopted in West Asheville. I live right here. This is Haywood Road in West Asheville. If y'all have eaten at the Admiral, it's like right about there. Here's 240. Westville Pub's kind of right about here. So these are the different zones of that. So we got the HR1 core in here, which is the kind of the historic core of West Asheville, and then we've got another little nub over here next to the Admiral. And so the first thing it does is it draws out the street. This is what the street should look like. Here's the building faces, front to front. This is the street's width. So it's a zoning code. It's just done in a way that's a little bit easier to read, and it's short. There it is. Those are the 2 pages for that district, or 4 pages. So here's the site, here's the lot width, here's where you place your building. So you get a picture along with the rule. So you have dimensions, just like a zoning code. And then you have setback, parking, building height, story height, ground floor, the window transparency. So you all have architectural standards that get into that you want to have retail frontages on a retail street. And then some, I can't even read that, pedestrian access in areas. So it's like the streetscaping and stuff like that. So it's just finding a way to graphically tie things physically. Does that all make sense? Just want to put that in there. As far as communities around the country that have kind of gone this way, These are the amount of form-based codes, and it really kind of took off in the 2000s. It's over 200 communities with form-based codes in the last 2 years. I also have this table. North Carolina has about 21 of them that have it. Asheville's kind of a hybrid. We've kind of got a blending of a form-based code going into our UDO. That seems to be working.
Everybody to hear the question. You know, our codes, we have a UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, and most cities do. You were comparing downtown structures per acre compared to a big box. Now, one of the things that I believe we have, and I would certainly like to be corrected if I'm wrong or am I thinking incorrectly. Whenever you have a big box comes in and they say, okay, we're going to have 4 acres under roof. We're going to have this size structure. We're going to have 160,000 square foot. I think our code requires them to provide X amount of parking, which may take up, 8 acres. So out of that 12 acre parcel of property, if 8 acres of it is just asphalt and striping, I can see why the return on per acre is down. Is that a function? Is that something that communities have learned to live with? Have some figured that out and said we're going to change our code for parking requirements? I mean, how do you address when something is the way it is because it is a ordinance or a requirement?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you've actually made the mental leap to the next step that a lot of communities don't get to, because they just assume, like that picture of Moses holding the tablet, that law is there delivered from God or something. But community after community has some formula. The 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet, or 10 spaces per 500 square feet of retail or whatever. Those rules come from thought through places, but they're often stole from another community. That they'll go and just, Asheville's growing up, it goes and steals that policy because they have a parking problem now. So they take that rule from Greenville or from Charlotte or something like that. A lot of communities don't go back and reinvestigate that. They don't think through, all right, well, is that working for us? If you have that standard built into the system, if you require and obligate me as a developer to build that, I'm going to consume more real estate. It's cheaper for me to buy a bigger piece of land and just make surface parking versus a structured parking area. At about the tune of $18,000 per space in downtown Asheville versus this parking structure, which is $35,000 a space. So Asheville, in its downtown, chose in the 1980s, part of Doug Bean, the city manager, and Leslie Anderson, and a lot of people, were that they were investigating, okay, we've got this downtown, what do we do with it? And one of the things downtown had at that point were parking standards. And they essentially threw the parking standards out the window. They're like, we don't need these. Because what would have obligated people to do is buy the building next door, tear it down, and make the parking happen. So instead, the city went ahead and invested in a structured parking situation. That's when they started building those parking decks. So you see the Rankin Street garage get built, the Wall Street garage, and there was on the books to do 2 other parking garages throughout downtown. The city was going to take the leadership position of being the lost leader of parking, because they were like, we're going to lose money anyway once that building gets torn down and we have no parking. Does that make sense? Or we have parking.
Sure, yeah.
So case in point, this building here, this is a public parking garage right in the belly of this guy. And when we were talking with the city, it was really kind of interesting because we're building these 30-something units of housing on the back side here. And the consultant that the city hired was strong-arming us to buy parking spaces. And we had to sit down with the city and run through the math on this and said, look, we'll buy those spaces from you for $35,000, and we're going to take that fee and bury it into the cost of our housing. So we're going to add $35,000 onto the cost of housing to pay for that parking that we have to give you that money for, right? How about this? Why don't you just sell parking passes and we don't buy any of them? We sell our housing units at a lower price. So those individuals, if they choose to have a car, will come to you and buy a parking pass. then when that individual drives out of the door and leaves to go on a hike, go mountain biking, go to dinner, go to work, you can resell that parking space. You make double your money back. You know, and so if a developer buys the space, we're going to put a big reserve sign on it. Not only anybody use it, but we lose that opportunity of that cash flow generation. Where Asheville is ahead of you is that we charge for parking. So that's you want to have an argument with your merchants. That's an argument that'll be in your history at some point. But to have free parking on the street all day long, that's a cost y'all are bearing right now, and it's not an easy conversation to have. So we're in a luxury now that Asheville is so desirable that people get it. You know, there was a time when it was cheaper to park on the street than to park in a garage, and our community went through that argument in the 80s because people that worked at the haberdashery or the coffee shop were parking right in front of the store and blocking that space, and so it became this peer pressure of getting those employees to park somewhere else so that you could have that turnover. And it wasn't until we started charging that was reinforcing. So those are conversations. But basically, if I have a surface parking lot, if you're obligating me to do that, I buy a bigger piece of land, and on a per unit basis, that piece of land becomes cheaper from an assessed value. Secondly, that's made doubly damaging to you from a tax standpoint, because when the assessor goes out there and assesses asphalt,
yeah, it's not.
there's nothing.
Right.
So no low improvement value.
So there's no state inspection code, holy grail of code books that says you must have this amount of parking. What about for restaurants? I've always believed that whenever you have a restaurant, you have to have so much parking per table.
Asheville has 0. You know, in our downtown, we have no parking requirement, 0, none. So, you know, but again, it takes a comprehensive, cooperative strategy with the city to accomplish that. That we're able to pull that off because the city has been strategic about the parking garages, which has added the supply.
But that's how you did pull it off, is that the city of Asheville had a parking structure. That's how it seems to me, or it sounds like, that they both go hand in hand. In other words, you can't have one without the other.
It's infrastructure, you know, and you all have access to cheaper money than I do as a developer. So it's in that case with the city's parking garage, they were able to use different bonded money to be able to build that little structure in the center that we then put the cookie around, you know. So that made the whole cost less expensive. And I would highly recommend that you talk to Kathy Ball at the city, because one of the things that was nice is that it was a great public-private partnership where actually the developer for the hotel just went ahead and built the whole thing. It was easier and cheaper for the developer to negotiate lower prices than the city, but the city had better access to money, and the city's not in the business of building buildings all the time. So they're just like, look, y'all build buildings, you build the building, we'll pay for the parking garage, done. So where the state does step into things is in the way that you work your assessment methodology. And there are things that you can change and things that you can't change. I love this story about Maggie Phillips. Do y'all know Henry George taxation or land value taxation? Anybody ever hear that term? So
Refresh me.
In the 1800s, there was this tax economist. His name was Henry George, and he came up with this suggestion, this theory, to just get rid of valuing buildings, because there was an inherent problem in the 1800s in the United States where you have people property speculating in the middle of a downtown, forcing the city to grow further and further out, and people could just sit there and wait everybody else out. And so you all have to pay for the infrastructure, the schools, and everything, and that person can sit there with an unimproved lot, right? There's no improvement on top of it, just grass in the middle of downtown. So he thought that was kind of silly. He's like, why don't we just set a value at the apex of the city, and as it goes out, it goes out. And if you want to sit there and squander real estate and hold it, you're paying a high property tax. You're not going to get some get out of property tax free card by not improving your property. The biggest city to adopt land value taxation was Pittsburgh in the 1970s. If we think about what happened in the 70s with most American cities, is they bombed themselves out in the center. They made a lot of surface parking lots. So what happened is I, as a property owner, if I eliminated my building, I eliminated my tax load just by knocking the building down. And that's inherently punitive to folks that have to manage a city. You still have to drive a garbage truck by that, right? So Elizabeth Maggie Phillips, and I love her eyebrows, thought she was a Georgist. She believed in these policies as being more equitable in a community. So she thought, well, adults are too set in their ways. I'm going to teach children about land value taxation. You all know land value taxation. This is the game that Ms. Phillips invented. Look familiar?
Monopoly.
Yeah. So if you think about the lessons of Monopoly, what are the lessons? Location's important. Assemble land and put buildings on it. If you do that, you can win the game. These are lessons that you're trying to achieve in your real estate. We don't have enabled land value taxation in our state. Pennsylvania does, Vermont does. This is something to ask your state legislature. But what our state does give us is different ways around things. That we have development zones. There's different tools that we have where you can manufacture it synthetically. You can do kind of an impact fee. But if you're having speculation problems, this is something that, and it's a hard conversation. You get into politics with that. But again, the economics behind it goes back 200 years. But it's just, we've seen it just walking around in the downtown. It's something to deal with.
Mr. Minicozzi, our staff does a good job of preparing good speakers such as yourself to speak to council to help us stimulate our minds and our thoughts when it comes to our comprehensive plan, and in tonight, certainly the land use plan. So what I'd like to do is ask council if they have any questions of you, maybe to review something, maybe something that I look forward to going back and looking at the presentation. You said you're going to provide us with a PDF?
Yeah, we'll leave a PDF of this whole thing. And again, Aaron knows he can move around the model and do all sorts of crazy stuff now, so.
Okay, so may I open it up to council members?
I have a question.
Please do. Yes, ma'am.
My question is more about timing of dense development. We may, as a city, want denser development because it financially is a great benefit to us, but at what point do you set some, set a developer up for failure? If you don't have the population base, and they're predicting that the western part of the state, the population is not going to grow that much, it may even decline. I'm sure you've worked through that.
Well, those are questions of absorption, and a lot of it depends on the developer and their tolerance for risk. We were lucky in the fact that we were essentially what's known in the industry as a patient investor. Julian didn't need a high threshold performance return. He wasn't seeking one in the immediate future, but we're a revolving fund. Our money can't just disappear. So we weren't out there just freely risking the money into failing projects either. We had to be smart about it. So, that's a hard conversation because there are developers that would take the risk and do it. You've done it just up the street. There's, I've got a lot of questions about the building down the hill that's 4 stories next to the campus. There's a lot of questions on where that is that I don't know about, that I'd like, I've probably got more questions for you about, did the developer go bankrupt? Is it tied up in a lawsuit? I don't know. The street context is critically important in that situation. When you have density and you have small units and you're being stacked in that situation, think of it like a habitat for a bird. A bird has certain ingredients that it needs. It needs shade, it needs berries, it needs access to other birds, it needs a meadow, a stream, all that stuff. You don't put a bush in a parking lot in a big sea of 20 acres of asphalt and think that it's a bird sanctuary. It's not going to work. So when you go to that urban environment, you see an urban building and it's on a high volume street, and I know DOT probably fought y'all tooth and nail on trying to make wider sidewalks or even put on street parking, but y'all don't have the traffic load that really demands the width of that street. It's kind of crazy. But that's going to take a conversation with DOT to get them to change their thinking. how they do their corridors impacts how your real estate functions. Now, if that project stutters or fails or whatever, that sets a tone for other developers in the area of their risk, you know? So I don't know, Julian did his whole portfolio is $12 million. And that's one individual benefactor in a community. I don't know if your community has a tolerance for cultivating someone like that. If you have a Julian here that's a patient investor that could take the longer view. But those individuals that do that have a higher threshold for risk than what we have. We're having development in Asheville. I'm on the planning board in Asheville. And we get these developers that, I'll be quite honest, that it's junk what they're bringing us. They're like 200 and 300 units of apartments coming in as mixed-use developments with 2% of the project is retail. It's just suburban, multifamily, high-density housing without any of the benefit of a mixed-use environment. So that species of bird that lives in that unit is the type of person that wants to walk to a coffee shop, walk to get a gallon of milk, walk to do this. But you have the developers who are retail or residential developers, and that's all they care about is getting as many residential units into Asheville right now because we're hot. We're in the same market. We're a little bit hotter up in Asheville than you are here. But I think y'all should come up to Asheville and talk with us. We are experiencing a different world that's hopefully in your future. But what happens when you succeed? We're succeeding right now, but it brings another set of problems. Did I get close to your answer? Or?
Yeah, we just don't have a lot of those developers that, they want a return on their investment and they don't want to wait a long time.
Well, you can find them. Harry Pilos in Asheville is another individual. Reaching out to the Urban Land Institute, out of the area chapter is in Charlotte, and again, it's bringing them to the table and saying, what kind of opportunities do you see here? Again, there's so many different types of developers out there that if you just keep on hearing from a one-trick pony developer, that's all they do. This is what I've done before, and this is too much risky to do a second floor unit. It's like, all right, well, I'm not going to get you to be a different performer. It's like asking a hockey player to be an ice dancer. It's not going to work.
Right.
And that's just if you start attending these developer conferences, you'll see there's so many different types of developers out there. And it's not that, like I said, it's not that Julian in public interest projects wasn't making money. We are. It's just that money is a different kind of cash flow, and those developers are out there. But
Thank you.
Yeah.
Council members? Mr. Morrow? Mr. Dixon, or?
Mr. Minicozzi, I believe I understood you correctly when you were talking about the density and what it brings. Can it be a variable per location or geography, just like we were briefly mentioning before, the New Fritz Broad place, where you've got your retail, your restaurants, and then you've got condominiums, but you're not seeing that output, that spike, like your graphs were showing before. Mm-hmm. I was just wondering
why that didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were actually expecting that when we started doing the model, and I think it's the way that your assessor works with real estate, which is actually fair and equitable with this standard that they probably have. That those units aren't fully active, so they haven't tripped that building up to its full taxable value. In Buncombe County, if y'all know, in downtown Asheville, the Renaissance Plaza Hotel. If you're facing that building, immediately to the right, there's a condo building that was built called 70 Market Street. The majority of those units were bought by investors that were essentially in the game to flip or do whatever, and that's just how the developer financed that project. These are people that when the recession hit, the music stopped and they're left holding the bag on these units. They weren't living in them because they're still living in their house. They were just speculating. And the assessor in Buncombe County was like, well, you paid for that, therefore that you've set the value, so we're going to tax you at that. And everybody cried bloody murder because they're being taxed in a building that was essentially half vacant. Here in Transylvania County, it seems that when you have vacancy, the assessor's like, well, there's no value there because it's not cash flowing. So it's not fair to tax those individuals behind that project this higher rate if they're not cash flowing. So I think that's what's going on with that property. I don't know if you all did any synthetic tax increment financing for the parking structure, so there's no public. Okay, so that's probably what's going on with that building. We were expecting it at a higher level, but I suspect that's your tax assessor's discretion. You know, I'd encourage you all to have a conversation with your assessor. When I get into this, I usually ask people, like, how often have you had your assessor come here to explain how they do anything? You know, well, actually, John Tyler was with me. It's another nerdy presentation. I'm sorry, I run my mouth a lot, but
at the Grove Park Inn, it was a room full of budget officers.
North Carolina Municipal Budget Officers Conference. It was the finance officers for every city in the county across the state. And I did most of this presentation. And by the time I got to the end, I said, show of hands, who in this room has a quarterly meeting with the assessors to kind of talk about pricing? Anyone? No one's hand went up. And so I was like, all right, annually, who has an annual meeting with the assessors to figure out how pricing happens? Anyone? And no one's hand went up, and that's when I lost it. And I was like, seriously? Has anyone ever met with the assessor? Not a single hand went up. Now think of this. This is your CFOs. These are your financial officers. And I said to them, I said, look, you get a check from the county once a year as property taxes. Then you turn around and you meet with your city manager and you pay all the bills. Aren't you looking at how the cash flow operates? You know, if you're looking at the market and that's all you're getting is you're standing there at the cash register just scanning groceries, right? And you're just scanning potato chip bags all day long. And every once in a while a carrot comes by. Do you see that the carrots are priced at $50 a stalk and the potato chips are priced at 10 cents a bag? Like, how do you think the market's going to respond? And so as long as you're conscious of that, that's how the assessors are price tagging things, then you can be better equipped to deal with the cost of this stuff. You know, and just realize the market's being set by assessor standards. So I encourage every community to have a meeting with, and when you get down that wormhole, it gets crazy, I'll tell you. It's like, some of this stuff doesn't make any sense. It's a circular logic. But you know, you wouldn't operate your business that way, where somebody's pricing the shovels for 10 cents a shovel, and then you're like, wow, they're just flying off the shelves. It's like, well, yeah, look at the price. So.
I want to ask you about the importance of geography. You saw our creek side there, but maybe that's our river link, you know. But in the sense that we are a product of the geography here, and of course, as you know, we've got water everywhere. So it's a little bit of a challenge when you think about how you get from levels to levels, because really we are a series of terraces in our town. But we have embraced, with that as a background, we've embraced the natural world of woods and water, arts and culture, basically, to formulate who we are and develop our sense of place. How important is that in attracting an investor, or an investor understanding how we feel about that?
You know, it's a critically important question if you can articulate where you are and where you're going. You know, it's a statement, I should say, that from a development perspective, you're a public-private partnership, whether you like it or not. You service access to real estate. You know, if there weren't roads, if there weren't sidewalks, if there weren't public services like police, fire, water, sewer, garbage, whatever, you wouldn't make that real estate active. There's a cooperation already implicit in the agreement of paying taxes. You know, I put Chapel Hill up here because Chapel Hill has a massive park system. Orange County has an urban growth boundary, which is an anathema in the state of North Carolina. So they went ahead and said, look, we want to preserve our farms. We don't want to grow any further out, in a way that they basically created what we all have to deal with as municipalities in North Carolina right now, which is a set boundary. But the county chose not to compete with the cities in a way. So the county is like, all right, well, we'll let you grow inside the cities, and then outside of that, it's going to be rural. You know, so in a way, the county is making out like a bandit, because if you just draped over this entire Orange County model a county tax flow, look what you're getting. Now, the other thing that was happening inside Chapel Hill is they wanted their cake, but they didn't want to pay for it. You know, they wanted to have this huge park system. Now, as you know, you don't get a huge tax flow out of parks. You don't get any tax flow out of parks. It's a liability, but it also provides benefit to real estate. You saw with Lake Toxaway the immediate benefit that happened with a crater in the ground called a lake, right? That value didn't disappear; it just slid up to the edges of the lake. And what Toxaway didn't do was draw that value past the streets. They privatized the whole rim, and you see what they get. From a city perspective, when you increase the public realm, if you drew the park system through, treated it like a waterway that came through your community, you can add value to different neighborhoods if everybody has access to that park. There was a real estate study done in 1913 by John Nolan of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in which they did a real estate analysis of the value of park systems inside of a community. Because Cambridge has adopted this neighborhood of parks idea, the neighboring community of Somerville was just like, we're just going to densify everything. Somerville became the densest community in all of the Americas, and there's very few parks there. But what they showed is that that park didn't lose value, it just transferred the value to adjacent areas. So it was a value transference. And then not only that, the neighborhood around it, because those kids had access to parks, was more desirable too. And it's just simple planning, it's planning for it. But in the case of Chapel Hill, back to Chapel Hill for a second, you know, those individuals, they pay the highest tax rate per square foot of any one in North Carolina. They have the highest county tax, they have the highest city tax. They also have incredibly desirable real estate because they're in the triangle. And they're also limited. You can't grow into the county, so it all shoves up into the municipalities. But what's interesting is how, you know, you all are on the board of directors, you have to communicate to your citizens base that don't have access to this information, that don't see it at a comprehensive level. They only see their own tax bill, right? So I've got this third grade book. I should show you in a second, but one of the statements inside the book is how children are tragically limited in their understanding of the world. That's a quote straight out of the book. It's a third grade book. Individually, we're equally tragically limited. And what we know about the world is how we operate. So my getting up, my neighborhood, and then my drive to work and my life around my work is the standard operation of how people live in their communities. In Chapel Hill, they're paying high taxes. They know that their tax bills are high. And they came to the meeting prepared to argue about their high tax bills until they saw this model. It's like, oh, you think your taxes are high down here in the yellow land? Why don't you come complain to the people in the purple zone? You know, immediately they started to see it in context. And I think that that's the challenge, is bringing this information in a comprehensive way so your community can see it, how it all adds up. And I know that's a long answer to your question, but I was getting to this point about Chapel Hill. Because they've got a $17 million library. I mean, they just gild the lily every chance they get, and then all of a sudden they got to pay for it, and they don't want their taxes to go up. Can't do both.
So in regards to form-based zoning, I guess I need to walk through that a little bit more, like a real-world scenario, because I understand the idea, but I would love to have an explanation of how that's applied.
I was a zoning administrator in a past life in West Palm Beach, Florida. Let me just walk you through one. So this is one of the building types. So as a zoning administrator, you know, the key thing about form-based codes, if they're done well, you want to do a comprehensive drawing of what's the future build-out look like. What do I look like when I'm my grandfather? You know, so it basically takes the entire context of the area, and they draw, usually the planning firm is based as a designer, so they'll draw you a picture through a public process. They'll have charrettes and things like that. So the community gets to see Brevard as the grandfather. What does it look like 25 years from now, and what do the buildings look like? You know, everybody agrees on that. Then they back the code out of that. They basically say, what does it take from the minimal zoning standard to make that happen? So I had this is my zoning code. This is the type 3 building. This is the entire code for that building. So as I was the zoning administrator, I would sit down with you, the developer, and say, here's your piece of paper, you've got to follow this. When you brought your drawings into me, and if it met this, you were approved. There's no public process, you're done. The fastest zoning approval that I gave was 15 minutes, in and out the door. Do you know what that means to a developer? It's unbelievable. Rather than having to go through an excruciating process of fiddling around with things, it's all written down on here so we all could follow it. And that was it. So here we have the building height. This is all on that piece of paper. So this is one section. And we have minimum of 2 stories. So our community decided in our downtown, you shall not build anything less than 2 stories. And I used to call this the McDonald's rule. They didn't want a McDonald's in the downtown. Or if you did build a McDonald's, at least build a fun house or something upstairs. And then once the developer's going down that road, they're just like, well, hell, I'll just build whatever my max is. So this is for a 5-story building. Say a maximum of 5 stories, minimum of 2. Asheville has a 2-story minimum in its downtown. Now think about that. That at least gets people to a level of thinking to go bigger. If you're forcing that, it's keeping that single one-trick pony out of an urban environment, which is you don't want to waste all of that in expensive real estate. This is the Chattanooga thing. Remember so that law helps. It's where you set your minimums. Stories at the sidewalk shall be no less than 12 feet tall from finished floor to, really simple stuff. Parking garages shall be no more than 5 stories high. So you can't put a parking garage bigger than the building in front of it, basically. You get into the next thing, it gets into building placement, that your facade shall be no less than 2 stories high, shall be built on the frontage line. So we want the facade on the frontage line, 80% of the width. Just really simple, at least build this much volume in the building. Surface parking lots are not allowed on the frontage. You probably already have a lot of these rules. The building use, this is the entire use for the building. All stories shall be for commercial and or residential use. The mixing of both is encouraged. And on retail frontages, so on Main Street, you can't put a residential unit on the ground floor, basically. And then the vehicular entries need to be no more than 30 feet. This is your parking requirements. In West Palm Beach, Florida, they had parking requirements. In Asheville, they don't. But we have 2 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet. We could waive that. The city could waive that with the downtown planning board. We had a separate downtown planning board that would meet once a month and move things quicker if you wanted to. And these are the architectural standards: concrete, stucco, roof pitches, storefronts, and then awnings, signage, and you're done. That's it. So you meet these requirements, you come in the door, you meet with the planning staff, the approval's there. So it's basically you want to negotiate everything up front. You want to, as a community, remove the heat of passion of an actual development. It doesn't help you all when I, as a developer, standing in front of you and I've just blown $50,000 in architects and landscape architect fees, and now you want to start negotiating with the design. Like, I'm immediately kind of upset about that. And then on top of that, you know that, and then your community wants to have a dialogue. Well, this is all kind of a very awkward place to have it, or in the council chambers. But if you pre-design the buildings, and I could give this to you. There's pictures where they just drew the buildings, and everybody agreed on that up front, and then you back the code out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. exceptions, I mean, other than parking?
It was a daily occurrence where developers would ask me, they're like, oh, Joe, I see that there's a 5-story limit. Could you make it bigger? And legally, I didn't have the authority. Council didn't have the authority. No one had the authority. It was set. We're done. You know, but again, that was done under a community where they've bombed out their downtown and they needed to push the volume down and spread out as much as possible. We got 4,000 units of housing in 4 years' time. It was incredibly rapid development. Developers would ask me all the time to raise the height limit. As soon as I told them, like, legally we can't do it, they're like, all right, we know what our limits are. They would go and renegotiate what the land would do because it was a set volume. Everything was very predictable. And it took some of the games out of the system. Now, I want to say take all of the games out of the system. We're talking about, this is South Florida. It's hard to describe what South Florida is like, especially in a zoning capacity. 3 of my past city council people are in jail. 3 of my county commissioners are in federal prison right now. So it's, you know, it's incredibly corrupt what was going on there. So yeah, people are asking all the time, but the laws were set. Those developers that they saw the beauty of the expedited process, we were more than happy to have them.
Jill?
Like, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Does building type 3 correspond to like C1 or downtown type land?
Yeah, this would be like a middle of the road downtown building. We had certain areas in our downtown that could go up to 15 stories. This is your vanilla downtown building. There was a townhouse area, but yeah, you would develop different typologies for different areas of town. You would, and it's back to the transect. You wouldn't want your urban building out here either.
Right.
So folks in the middle zone knew that they were going to grow up a little bit, that it's okay for townhouses and whatnot here, but it's not okay for a taller building in the middle of our neighborhood. So the predictable balance became drawing out that plan in that way so they could see how you're going to grow. And it's not perfect. I don't think there is such an animal as a perfect zoning process. I think it's just something to move into and see how it works and tweak it along the way.
Any other questions from council? Or of staff? Have any questions of own staff? Again, this is a workshop setting. This gives us great opportunity to have somebody like Mr. Minicozzi and as well as staff to volley questions back and forth, or even of ourselves.
I do have a question about the, I guess, grandfathered, code, things that are going on in your community, and either do you allow them to continue? Do you set a time frame? How's that? How do you move forward?
That's always an interesting conversation in Asheville. There used to be billboards in downtown Asheville. That's right in the middle of downtown. In the 80s, Asheville passed an amortization of the billboards in the downtown that basically they could matriculate out over time, and they weren't allowed to be grandfathered in. Some folks tried that conversation once we got hit by the digital billboards on Merriman, and they're just like, why are we doing this? We've already learned from downtown that we've grown value in our downtown by not being basically a large billboard. So why don't we try this for the rest of the city? And it turned into a war. So it's just, I don't know where your resistance points are for grandfathering. You should understand the economics behind it, especially for the property owner's side. It's perfectly feasible to go through the amortization process to get rid of billboards in the downtown, but we couldn't get outside of downtown through the rest of Asheville. So again, that's the politics of my community. It would take knowing the building We don't force tear downs in our downtown, and I wouldn't recommend that. But find a way to have a conversation with the property owner, because there is a price at some point that it becomes economically feasible for a redevelopment to happen. And go into it with the full partnership. You know, it's how can it be a win-win-win situation? Like the parking garage project that we did, we didn't have to do that, you know, but it's something that once we opened up the conversation, and we had a willing partner in the Aloft Hotel, it worked out. You know, there's things that we learned, you know, there's architectural conversations that we probably have, that we didn't have, that we probably should have, because I don't think there's a lot of satisfaction on the quality of the architecture of that building. It looks like drive-by at 55-mile-an-hour architecture that happened to land in the middle of downtown. But there are qualities that we do appreciate, like the balcony on the ground floor. The fact that they had retail continuously on the ground floor is great. They didn't want to do that initially, so that worked out.
Council, you have a question?
Joe, I personally struggle with corridor. For example, I don't know if when you drove in, and I've already mentioned this with staff at other workshops, the Wells Fargo Bank building that's across from Wendy's, that was built as an urban style at an angle with the parking not in the front. And I constantly see accidents about to happen there as people pull in, they do not know where to go to park. So I struggle with functionality of this type of design and development, and I don't know, maybe it was, you know, the parking plan wasn't correct, but can you speak to?
It's the parking plan, it's also it's the street. You know, that street is giving you every visual indicator that you should be on the highway somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You got wide lanes, you've got an aggressive traffic pattern, lots of in and outs. You know, there's a gentleman who focuses on that side of the conversation. His name is Charles Marone, or Chuck Marone. I'm a big fan of his work, but he calls those roads, he calls them stroads, a street road hybrid. You know, it's in a street environment. It wants to be a street because there's people walking across it, right? But it's designed like a road. It's designed to move people through your community. It treats your community like a kidney, not a heart. Just passing people through. It's like, well, wait a minute. Where people live here, they get run over because of the design of your road. And the engineers think it's perfectly safe because they're following a design manual. But the design manual actually gives them more flexibility to do something more urban. And they choose not to. We see this in Asheville on Merriman, on Patton Avenue. We have the same problem with our DOT. The DOT has a policy called Complete Streets Policies where they should be having that design on that road. So in the meantime, you live with the futon of all roads. It's not comfortable. You know, you certainly wouldn't want to sleep on it a lot of times, and it's not good for a couch either. So it's like, it's not working in either capacity. It's not functioning well as a road, and it's not functioning well as a street. So until you have that change of that physical environment, we're wired to behave a certain way when we're in a car, and we're given the signals, the cues to do things. So once we see wide lanes, we see the physical infrastructure of the street tell us it's a road, we're going to put our foot on the gas pedal. And then to make that turn into that driveway becomes difficult because you're amped up, ready to go. You can make the same turn on Main Street and you don't have that confusion because you're traveling slower. So they post the road to travel slower. They don't design the infrastructure to give you those cues. In essence, they give you the opposite cues. They're giving you the drive 55 mile an hour cue, not, you know, try driving 55 mile an hour on Main Street and see if you can even possibly achieve that. You'd freak out because you'd expect people to walk off the sidewalk or whatever because the environment closes in on you. So you're trying to do that with the buildings, but the street isn't giving you the same situation.
And I also worry as we develop more, new development comes along that corridor, the sidewalks that are in our ordinance to be built in front of that, we're gonna have more connectability, which is great, but it also puts those people in danger.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, you know, you need to have a bit of a sit down with DOT or area people to get them to explain that to you. We're going through that, again, we're going through that same process in Asheville because we're maxing out our downtown at this point. Now we're getting spillover into other neighborhoods that have these street road hybrids in them. And they don't help because as a developer, well, you have the investment just down the road here. Somebody invested lots of money into an environment that is not conducive to walking. So they've created a habitat, they've created a building where that individual wants to get out and walk around. Well, what are you walking around to? You know, it's a dangerous street. So the four-story building, yeah, whatever that's called, I forget what it's called.
French Broad Place.
French Broad, yeah. So, you know, there are people that can help you with that conversation. There are specialists that focus on that. I'd highly recommend that you talk with a couple of them. I can give you a few names. We had the same problem in West Palm Beach with DOT down there, and we just said to them, like, look, you're affecting our cash flow because these are our properties that pay property tax, and how you design that state road affects our ability to cultivate wealth. It comes down to that. You know, any investment that's more urban in an environment that the road does that, it's a lose-lose situation because the developer's going to be compromised because they can't sell the units or lease the units, and then who's going to want to be there because it's dangerous.
Joe, I'm sorry.
Joe, you're familiar with Brevard. Sounds like you've driven in. Personally, I think we have three distinct commercial districts. I think we have the downtown district, which is distinct on its own. I think you have the Gateway Business District, which is right at the intersection of the Pisgah National Forest, which I think is a great position to be in. And then in between, there's a couple of miles, and I think that's just your corridor traffic where you would expect to see a fast food restaurant or a place to have your oil changed. We've had conversation and we've kicked a lot of ideas around about trying to make from downtown Brevard or from Main Street to the entrance of Pisgah National Forest. We've asked the question, at least, what would it look like to have a downtown theme all the way through, which I don't think it works.
Yeah, no, I think that there's places that are appropriate for it, and there's limits. You know, there's limits to what pedestrians like to walk. It's generally about a quarter mile. Incidentally, that's the distance of a mall. Mall stole that pattern from Main Street. They basically figured out what do people walk on Main Street, down one end of the anchor and then back the other way, and that's Main Street. So if you think in those patterns, you have different species of inhabitants. When you get down to the campus, there's a different pedestrian environment down there. And to some extent, those uses are picked up. So you got your pizza joint, your Chinese restaurant, place to get beer. That's your ingredients of being a student, I guess. But what's interesting is it's all done in a very suburban, auto-oriented way, when most of those kids could just walk across the street to get there. So it was a missed opportunity. You know, to some extent, you expect that that college feel there. Instead, you just get a single-use feel. But there are communities where the colleges have actually cooperated with developers. In Boston, if y'all have ever been to Boston, in Harvard Square in Cambridge, the school owns all of those buildings that look private. They just went ahead and bought them because they didn't want to have McDonald's across the street from campus. So they're perfectly fine with an Abercrombie and Fitch, but McDonald's was offensive for some reason. But they basically wanted to control that environment and capitalize on their own students. That's something that could have happened here, but I think the college is too small. And it's not on a lot of colleges' radar screen. Western Carolina University is we're actually working with them to do something similar to that, to build the village in Cullowhee that never happened.
Well, I want to ask $1 million question, and I want to get a bargain price for it. And I think that you might know. How far is somebody willing to walk with a gallon of milk? In other words, they live here. How far are they willing to walk? And of course, a gallon of milk is metaphoric.
Well,
But-
in a nice pedestrian environment, it's generally 20 minutes. But 20 minutes will get you far. And it's the environment. It's how many birds will be in a parking lot, or how many birds are going to be up on a mountainside with the stream and the
Well,
berries.
because it really what prompts that is I believe in a walkable community. I want us to have a walkable community. I'm very proud of our bike hike path, but I think it'd be almost on the borderline ridiculous and beyond ridiculous to think that somebody's going to walk 3 miles for a gallon of milk and then walk back.
Well, I'd have to know more about the context. If you're in our mind's eye doing that same corridor from here to Pisgah Forest,
Yeah.
there's neighborhoods on either side that are adjacent to that. Within those, there's a critical density that those individuals may make the walk. So you may not necessarily get a continuous urban environment, but you may get a node further out. When you go into West Asheville has that Haywood Street corridor there's an old gas station that's been converted into a burger restaurant called the Universal Joint. But basically from there into the Admiral was all auto-oriented at one point. It's now grown up because the density has reached a critical mass. Those individuals walk to that core area. It's nowhere near as dense as downtown, but that environment is now matured. So there may be maturity points along this corridor. It's not going to be the whole length. There's no way. And you need to have some of those auto-oriented uses. It's just keep a balance to that, and also understand that you see this. There's those commercial uses. When Walmart opens up, the first day is its best day. Every day thereafter, it's on a depreciation cycle of 15 years. So from your community standpoint, you're watching a depreciable cash flow come to you, and that's just part of the deal of what it is. So what's your future cash flow 15 years from now? And you're seeing this all up and down that spine, those other uses that get left behind. So you have the Asheville Grocery Outlet that's, what was that, like $300,000 an acre or something like that? Which is a third of a Walmart. So that's part of that process. And maybe, part of this is like an urban acupuncture, that you're doing a kind of a study of all of this stuff to see where's your best investment. Does that make sense?
No, it does, and I just, the reason I wanted to engage in this conversation is to bring perspective. I do think we have pockets of commerce in how you design and you build and even market your community. And Mr. Morrow's correct how we value our natural assets and how important that is. I think that gives us a distinction. I think that gives us a marketable distinction. However, at the same time, I don't think that we can change the economic patterns of people in general. I think that we as government, we decide what we want our community to look like, and I think, like you said, you just put out that standard, like you did in West Palm. You said, here it is. If you don't build it, the next person behind you will.
Yeah.
And they'll build it to what the community desires or what the community wants. But I don't think that I don't think that you can, over pizza and beer on a Saturday night, decide, come up with some kind of a philosophy. I think that there has to be real dollars and cents that you can learn a lot from developers.
Yeah. Well, if you go through the process, the community will give you the consensus of who you are. You'll get it. It just kind of flashed in my mind when you talked about the natural environment. Have y'all ever? I don't know how many people have been in Helena, Georgia, or Helena, Montana, but we did a project in Helena, and there are places in the West, like you can leave downtown on a bicycle and just go right up the mountain. Just find your path on the way out. Durango, Colorado. And we were talking about this incredible asset that you have in federal lands completely surrounding you, and to be able to get there from anywhere in here. That you already have the car access. Well, how about the other access points?
When we finish our bike hike trail, which we've only got, I think we have less than a mile to finish, we'll be the only city east of the Mississippi that can advertise that you can walk safely from your downtown into a national forest.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great.
Or bike.
Yeah,
Or bike.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's, that makes you unique. That's it's it's incremental, it's iterative. These are all small moves, but it's all about maintaining your authenticity and making you who you are. Being conscious of other communities and their lessons, but it still has to, rubber needs to meet the road here in this community and who you are and how you operate. So,
Council members, any other questions? I'd like to ask staff and management, is there anything that you would like for Mr. Minicozzi to address for our benefit?
Josh has a question, I have one as well.
Yeah, just, Joe, would you mind maybe recapping some of the key positive and negatives to form-based care? In other words, are there lessons learned across the country where you can point to maybe those 5 key benefits and 5 key drawbacks to it?
okay. Yeah, the 5 main benefits are that you start to have a better relationship with the roads, which was critically important. The con is that if you don't have an engineering staff, either on your local staff or in the state staff, that is on board with that system, then you could rub up against cultures. That's one of the issues. The process was more predictable, faster. Those are benefits. They were also seen as cons to some people in our community, but I think overall people were cool with it. I think our citizens, both in Asheville and in West Palm Beach, as long as they get the vision and can see the vision and they can read the process, we found that in form-based codes that your citizens don't have the time to wade through a UDO that's written in 2-column format, mostly legalese. They just don't have that kind of time, and if they can't get through it, they get frustrated. So we found with the form-based codes is it makes that one page, just tell me what I need to know. I don't want to have to drift through section 245B, D, F2 to know what my rules are. Developers pay people to do that. But in both cases, there are pluses and minuses. With a lot of form-based codes, sometimes people throw the baby out with the bathwater. They just wholesale, just throw out the old code, start with a new one. Don't do that. It can get kind of dicey because there's institutional knowledge that you have built into your zoning code. But also, nothing is sacred inside the zoning code either. So as you go through that process, everything should be on the table. But just talk with people, find communities that have been through it, talk with the planning staff at Asheville. I'm trying to think of some larger communities that have done larger ones, but there's a lot of information out there. I would call Rob Studeville at New Urban News. Incidentally, there's a movement, I don't know if y'all know about it, it's called New Urbanism, where there tends to be a lot of practitioners that focus on this type of city building, and they have their own conference and everything. And I'd recommend that conference for y'all too. It's kind of fun. It's a little on the activist side, but they're meeting in Dallas this year. But there you can see a lot of administrators who have gone through that process and learn from them on what works and what doesn't. But it's come a long way since I practiced.
Joe, you had a slide, and it was of a street in Asheville, and I think what you were trying to convey is you had different colors along that street spine.
Yeah.
And I think you were trying to convey a transect, I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's kind of get to that. Yeah, I've actually got this whole code in print if you all want to look at it. But basically the stuff in red is stuff that you'd find in a downtown. By the time you get to the blue, you see the ice blue over here. This is mostly just housing. So here you see just on this one, what is this? This is essentially 2.5 mile spine. that we get 1, 2, 3, actually here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 different types of zoning. So in the red area, where you have a higher critical density of housing, you expect and code for a higher use of real estate. This is where you have your ground story retail continuous. This is your almost, well, it's about a quarter mile right there, boom. Once you get out of that, it starts to relax and turn into, buildings can be further from the street, and tends to be some residential on the ground floor mixed, or townhouses or whatever. But it's not monolithic. It's very surgical in the way that it operates.
And that's what I thought you were trying to convey, is that you're not necessarily looking to promote the core along that whole spine.
Yeah.
It's just that it transitions, and so you're not
Exactly.
necessarily looking, as an example, for walkability along that whole spine.
Yeah.
Spine.
Well, there's sidewalks that go through here, but here's where it gets hot, right in here. But then it relaxes, in greens, and then it picks back up again over here, because there's a joke in West Asheville. This is West Asheville. This is East West Asheville. It's an inside joke in Asheville, but who lives on the east-west side?
Funny.
For us it is. It's two totally different types of people divided by the highway. But so this is the little downtownish thing for this neighborhood, and the highway becomes a real physical barrier between the communities. And then this one has its own little downtowny thing over here. But we're a very dense district in West Asheville.
Sure.
This is probably all the size of Brevard right there.
The other question I've got on that is, even when you get outside of the core areas, do those other areas, such as what you've got coded as expansion and corridor, do they support what looks like the residential areas that are adjacent to the spine?
Yeah, like this right here is an Ingalls, and I live right there. And so this Ingalls has a huge parking lot in front of it. If you've been in West Asheville and been to the Ingalls, that's it. So it's it's coded for that thing to be there. But it's also coded for the other side of the street where you have smaller parcels to grow up, because they kind of figure that it's going to be impossible to assemble land now that it's mostly developed in.
So while it's color coded to the right of what is the Ingalls, the HR3, the corridor,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily focused on someone walking down that spine to get to the Ingalls.
Exactly.
It's there also to support the neighborhoods that's just behind the Ingalls and adjacent to that.
Exactly, and in this area in the green, it's inside the zoning. It's churches, buildings set back from the street. It's kind of more relaxed because it's more auto-dependent because of the highway access right here, and it's mostly coded by how that place is behaving. Some infill buildings, but not nearly the density and intensity that you'd find in the hotter colors. So just think of the hot, intense, cooler colors, less intense.
And then the last question on this slide, particularly in those, what you're referring to as the hot areas, how have you or Asheville or just cities in general been able to influence their state departments of transportation to have a corridor that's more reflective of the land use that's surrounding it?
In this case, we're lucky because it's a state corridor that goes through there, but the buildings are also old, so the buildings aren't going anyplace. We're having a bigger problem up here on Patton Avenue, where our comprehensive plan calls for this corridor to grow up, because we know that these uses are going to transition out. They're old strip malls and first wave suburbia from back when the county line was at Patton Avenue. What was north of county line of Patton Avenue was Buncombe County. Asheville's now incorporated that whole area. So we're having a real devil of a time with DOT because they just see this as a conduit to go out to Madison County. And as far as they're concerned, they just want to move cars. But we're working with that. I mean, it's using the MPO to talk about it. There's sidewalks that are now being built there. But Asheville's kind of engulfed that whole area. This is also a great corridor for us to densify in through here because it is so close to downtown. But it's just, again, until we change the street, we can't really have that conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, you give me another idea. Earlier in your presentation, you talked about public-private partnerships, specifically where a city will financially participate in a parking garage, and as a result, create denser development, and as a result of that, get more property tax revenue. So it's a good ROI, as you said. Have you heard of anyone adopting that same philosophy with the Department of Transportation, where a city is investing in something to make the road corridor at least more pedestrian friendly, like a median strip?
Well, I'm actually laughing because we just did this project in High Point, North Carolina. The community adopted this large master plan for doing a road diet, which is eliminate a couple lanes and kind of neck the street down and put higher density, put on street parking, go a little bit more urban. And they're doing that. I don't know how y'all are familiar with High Point, but High Point's essentially abandoned its downtown and given it away to what they call as the trade show, the market. So twice a year they have this unbelievable 250,000 people just jam the city to go into these huge buildings. They're like 7-story tall convention centers. They're all private, so they're paying ridiculous property taxes. So the city's kind of gotten used to some incredible revenue out of those buildings, and they kind of got lazy in a way. Winston-Salem and Greensboro are now eating their lunch, following the trends in the marketplace, which is heading more urban, and they're building those units of housing. So the community decided, let's go ahead and take an area of downtown, their version of West Asheville, basically, and let's grow it up. We've given up on the big buildings. We can't do anything to change those. They are what they are. That's cool. But we need to cultivate new revenue. So we did a revenue forecasting. I can give you the video of that, where, if you add the cost of that roadway, the city, if they take it on, if the buildings are built adjacent to it, what's the cash revenue, new revenue that you're going to get? And we also did, JT did a radius poll, because if you change the value of Main Street, you're going to affect the property behind it. So you're going to see the rising tide raise all boats behind it. And it's not as much as you see on the infrastructure, but you'll see a dip behind it. So we did a whole value analysis along these same lines of what's it going to cost the city to do the infrastructure project in 15 years, how much money are they going to get out of it? And I think it was like $1.7 million of total revenue off the top of my head. But those are all things that you can start doing with this. And you should be asking these questions. What's our payback on this? Let's not just throw money out there and hope that something happens. Y'all should expect and demand a payback in your community for that infrastructure investment.
Joe, I'm curious, what's the zoning down in Merriman towards North Asheville? Because from my observation, there seems to be less pedestrian traffic, but you'll see on Kimberly or by UCA, there's a lot of foot traffic.
Yeah. Well, the street's dangerous. The street's a death trap if you're on a bicycle. If you want to ever have some fun, try riding a bicycle up Merriman. So in our comprehensive plan, we're calling for that to be road dieted. And I think in our 2025 plan, we call for a 3-lane road. Now, of course, everybody's freaking out over that because they can only see it for what it is and not for what it could be. And we're also, shame on us for not running the numbers of the economic effect. So as a planning commissioner, one of the things that I've been asking our staff to do is exactly the work that we do in other cities, which is run the revenue model. The Harris Teeter that just got built on Merriman? So there was a big hoo-ha over that. That was zoned highway business. So rather than go through and eliminate highway business zoning and ask for something of a higher capacity, we did this very passive, hey, we'll let you do urban density, which doesn't really help. So they have an as of right to do highway business, and that's what we got, was that Harris Teeter with the strip mall. The housing right across the street on Eloise, if you take the property of the Harris Teeter, float it up into space, that same dimension, and just drop it in the neighborhood behind it, it produces 4 times the property taxes of the Harris Teeter. We've essentially shot ourselves in the foot because we didn't amend our zoning to match our comprehensive plan, and that's just the sloppiness of how we practice in Asheville. So as a planning commissioner, I find it terribly unfortunate, knowing what we see other communities do, that we let that opportunity go. And that's going to be a conversation all up and down Merriman, because there are other spots along Merriman that are zoned highway business, which is kind of silly. Can y'all find me the highway? I don't see it there. So
you're saying you'd rather have taller buildings there?
well, the neighborhood was interested into that. The neighborhood actually wanted to see townhouses, 8-story buildings, all of that, because they're already that dense, and they're just like, well, why not? The first developer that came through said, well, your zoning says we're limited up to 8 stories with urban village. I want to do 16. And our elected officials rightly said, look, you're getting this planning gift of going from highway business to 8 stories. Be happy. But it was the height of the recession, or the height of the building boom, and the developer gambled and went for the shot the moon. So that's, again, all part of the real estate dynamic of whatever they're negotiating the price with the property owner for. Maybe they were asking too much, and this developer was trying to make the deal work, and he couldn't make it work with 8 stories. But the community was suffering making the deal work because of the land transaction, if that makes sense. But that used to be the Deal motor car site. It's a pretty big wound in Asheville, that whole process, the way that went down. But that belies the conversation of what should happen on the street. Merriman needs to change.
It almost looks like a possible extension of your downtown, the way the build out is.
Yep.
And it's kind of hard for me to sit here and relate Brevard and Transylvania County to downtown Asheville and the layers that peel back behind the radius of it, because it's so different. It's eclectic, and there's certain areas that are completely opposite than outside of Merriman or going down on Charlotte Street or so forth. So
if you look at our master plan, our downtown master plan, it kind of looks like this. You know that there's corridors that come out of the downtown. There's Merriman, there's Broadway, French Broad, Charlotte Street. All of those corridors have a transition zone where there's an expectation that downtown is going to creep out into the neighborhoods. Not at the intensity of what downtown is, but that area of Harris Teeter was part of the corridor plan. But because we didn't have zoning that matched it, the developer shot for the bottom and got it, and it's just that's the type of developer that came in and made the transaction. So we as a community, that's what we get. If you go just 2 blocks away to Broadway, and like where the Moog factory is, I don't know if you know where the Moog thing is. It used to be, it's where Earth Fair started, one of those buildings down there. There's a developer that just built a 6-story mixed-use building that'll give you an idea of how that corridor is going to grow. So in that case, you have a developer literally 3 blocks away that understood the urban mixed-use vision for that area, and he built it. So there's a little coffee shop, and it's got this kind of Pebble Dash, kind of funky, historic-looking building.
now is that set up to kind of wave out, like you have Lexington right there?
Yeah.
As you go further on behind it, will that build out also kind of wave out to the surrounding area?
Yeah, in theory it'll go, but it'll drop down, and then in another area, like in this case out here in West Asheville, it's 3 miles from the core. It grows up its own little nub out there. So you have Strauss Park. Eventually, that density will work in a way that will grow up its own little core. It's designed and laid out to do that. It's just the timing in the market didn't make that happen.
Now, saying all of that to say this, are you able to see that happening off of Main Street, Broad, in Caldwell here in Brevard? Can you 10, 15, 20 years from now visualize that opening up here?
I can. In fact, we even talked about that. There's the conversation of going out Main Street, but then what about on either direction? Just there's this. What's the name?
Right there, I'm not familiar with the street, but the large, so right across the street from City Hall, it's just a vacant lot right now. Up on the hill, you have the townhouses.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I couldn't see on Google Maps, but walking around, that's a golden opportunity right there in your court. So, of course, there's leak out on some of those streets, but there's some great opportunities within your downtown as well, just right now. So.
And it is the conversations with the property owners are always, they're interesting. I mean, it's, in the case of Merriman, before Harris Teeter happened, after that first fight where we had the 8-story opportunity and the developer went and shot for 15, the community got together. There were 3 previous planning directors. I don't know, many hundreds of hours of volunteer time that went into it, but we did a corridor visioning process of Merriman of how to do a more urban pattern, because it's slicing right through an urban neighborhood. So we're just like, well, why don't we just make it all happen in a predictable way? That made it to council and it was shot down. And the property owners fought it because it was a change in zoning, and they had a mistrust of government, and they just assumed the worst. And I remember one of the previous planning board chairs, Hetty Fisher, she's a realtor, and she was up there and she's like, we're giving you more zoning. We're giving you more density. We were making you more money. And the property owners are like, we're against it. And it collapsed, you know. So I don't know what level of education needed to happen, but we didn't do it. So it's just something to be aware of in your conversations with your community. Now again, we might be a little bit more crazy down in Asheville, I don't know, but in a lot of communities, that's the community education is the hardest part.
Is there any other questions from council that you would like of Mr. Minicozzi, or perhaps of staff and management? I think this has been very enlightening, and it gives us kind of expanded or enlightened our processes. Certainly, I think you know, I congratulate staff and management for having you come and share these thoughts in this presentation. I think it was worthwhile, and I was glad to see, even though there's not many left, we had a number of people that did come and look at what goes into planning and what goes into forecasting the future of our community. So I thank you. Was there anybody else before I had mentioned, I had shared with the public that this is not a public hearing, so therefore we're not looking for any in-depth or any summaries, but because I did mention public participation, is there anybody from the public that wanted to share a comment? Mr. Surratt?
I'd just like to comment, it's not necessarily a question, is it based on your the slide you had about the return of the sales tax money, how much the county actually benefits more than the cities or the municipalities that generate that flow of income? I think it just would behoove all of us as county residents, for not only the town of Roslyn, the town of Brevard, and the county commissioners, to sit down and have a discussion about that very issue, and maybe use his chart there to reinforce that, how important that is, and maybe then you can get the county and the 2 townships to work together in a cooperative manner and say,
Sure.
Hey, if we all invest in this, we're all going to win from this, and the county's even going to win more than the municipalities, but in the long run, we all win because it keeps our property taxes to a low level.
I'll share with you, for everybody, I'll share with you past conversations that I have had, not only at the Heart of Brevard, but at the Chamber of Commerce, as well as I've spoken freely in meetings, and Mr. McKissick from the Transylvania Times has reported on it. And these numbers are a couple of years old, so they may vary by a percentage, but at the time that I started sharing, the 74% of all the sales tax revenue collected in all of Transylvania County was originated within the city limits of Brevard. But because of the ad valorem method, which is I think it was developed in Raleigh. I think it was developed, you probably know the history, back in the 50s. I think they were mentally lazy when they developed that, if I might be honest. And because of that, it speaks to the land, and I think it shows 2% of the city of Brevard's land mass in Transylvania County, so it's proportionated back to us, and of course that's based on a value. Roughly, we receive, even though we create 74% of all the sales tax revenue, only 12 cents on every dollar is brought back to the city. And you ask yourself, well, why is that? And Mr. Moore does a great presentation and has given that presentation to many civic organizations, how cities were at one time known as the civic center of communities, and there's a lot of history behind that, and so it didn't take that many dollars because it was generating so much. But then in the time and era of your big boxes wanting to locate outside of the cities and even industry, it became to have an effect. But you know, you might ask the question, well, what would the city do if it didn't have 12 cents on the dollar, but 25 cents on the dollar? Even though it was disproportionate, what would it do with those dollars? I would tell you that this city council would fund a downtown master plan that would invite more people to come. That would invite more people to open up their wallets, and they would have extended stays, and they would have more infrastructure that would support other investors that would come. So I think it would be almost a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, it takes money to make money.
Yeah.
It's just that the city of Brevard, quite honestly, does not have industry, has never had industry. Some people say, well, what about Augusta when you had Augusta? Augusta was never ever in the city limits of Brevard. They never were on the city's water system. So in a heartbeats moment, I would love to have them back, as well as DuPont and the other industry that we had, but they're out of the market. And what we've got left, obviously we're trying to be good stewards with the dollars to help generate business. Now, one of the things that we do have going for us, and I asked Mr. Minicozzi about this, or commented, we have distinction. We have what other people want. We have a walkable downtown. We're at the entrance of Pisgah National Forest. We have woods and water. We value the cultural arts. So I think we've branded ourselves, and I think we're attracting a lot of investors. But I'm an impatient person. I want it to happen a lot quicker than it's happening, and it only takes money. It only takes money to do that. But just to give you an idea, if we were able to capture what this spike, what this graph shows, if we were just to be able to capture the lion's share of that, I would promise you could come back in a few years from now, and that spike would even be greater, because you would see downtown investment, not only on Main Street, but throughout the community flourish. And I do strongly believe you would see more investment interest in our community. So I appreciate, Mr. Surratt, you making that comment. It's something that I've been preaching for a while, and I'm hoping that more people just like yourself start to realize that, wow, there's a disproportionate graph there. And I will tell you that Mr. Hawkins, chairman of County Commissioners, who was here earlier, we have engaged in that conversation some, but it takes this entire body and their entire body. And I think that they're beginning to understand the, how sales tax are generated. It's really a business model.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head. When I was doing the presentation in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, it was to the Downtown Association, and they had a full room of people, but the entire board was there from the Downtown Association, and it was like that scene in Frankenstein, the movie, where everybody starts lighting the spears on fire and they're all getting ready to march. I mean, they were ready to watch some heads roll down at the county. And I was like, y'all chill out for a second here. In this room, in this last year, who in this room has attended a county commission meeting? And one hand went up. And I was like, y'all haven't even started the conversation with them, and now you want to hang them? It's like, just go and start the conversation, because in defense of the county, they only hear from people out in the county. And they rarely hear from the people that are working the sidewalk on downtown. They don't know what the issues are, and they don't see you for that same taxpayer. If anything, this is the key here. You can make more purples and reds in downtown Brevard. It's harder to make more lake happen at Lake Toxaway. So that's limited. It's a handsome producer, but you saw how thin that is. So you can expand your lake. You can add more begets more in a downtown, which is kind of a nice thing with that. But anyway, but yeah, starting the conversation.
But was there anybody else that would have a question or a comment?
I just was going to ask a quick question about, most of this model sounds like it applies primarily to commercial, retail, residential. When you're talking industrial uses or manufacturing, you know, the downtown environment is, you know, when you need really tall ceilings and it's, you know, it just doesn't work a lot of times. So I assume that that's just not really part of this model.
Industrial buildings, again, it's thinking along what they are. You know, industrial buildings tend to be really cheap and huge. So they're rarely going to show up big on these kinds of models because of what they are. They're massive landscapers and they're cheap buildings. It'll be interesting when Asheville completes New Belgium Brewery because it's a fairly compact site, even though it's a massive facility, that we'll be able to run the numbers on that. And I think Sierra Nevada is unfortunately just across county line, I think. But yeah, it's, you know, that's a trade-off. You know, you can't take a large industrial facility and shove it on the main street. It's just not going to work. You know, so that typology just has a different kind of breed to it. And like I said, I eat chicken wings and pizza and lots of bad things that I enjoy, but at the same time, I got to balance it off.
Well, if you're looking for higher paying jobs, and if that opportunity arises, you wouldn't want to say, no, we don't want that because it needs to be downtown.
Well, there's a whole trend of economic development that's getting into place-based economics, which is build the place that people want to be. They'll bring their jobs with them. Asheville's kind of defaulted into that, where people live there and either work from afar. I've got several friends that are actually in the tech industry in San Francisco, but they live in Asheville because of the quality of life. So they just show up, they just fly to San Francisco once a month or something like that.
Anything else? Mr. Moore, are you satisfied that we've had conversation?
Yes, sir. Thank you for council's time. That's all from us, thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you all for so much time. This is, seriously, I do this a lot, and this is a great meeting. This is a lot of time and a lot of stuff. And I know I'm kind of nerdy and like to do this stuff, but usually council sessions are 15 minutes in and out. This is great that you all did this.
We appreciate you coming. Council, anything else at your pleasure other than adjournment? Take a motion to adjourn. Second it? Second. All in favor say aye. Thank you.
Thank you.